like to share. We've been working together for almost 16 and a half years now, Dr. Youngberg, and there's been all kinds of things that I have enjoyed, and my wife and Karen and I and our family have enjoyed and appreciated in our friendship and the professional side of the relationship with Dr. Youngberg and his wife, Betsy, and their family. And one of the things that I've loved about him is that he is really determined to be able to find the best possible situations that'll bring the very best outcomes using every natural method possible. I don't know how he ever gets any sleep, because I think he's up half the night, most nights, researching and finding all kinds of things that are being reported in studies from around the world. But we're very fortunate that he is a part of our Fallbrook community. And a couple of things that I would say. Wes has always pursued an avenue that was just a little bit different than the regular routine. I love that he comes from a family of medical missionaries, doctors, and hospital. Youngberg Hospital in Singapore, his great uncle actually founded that hospital, so mission service in South America. But he's been involved in all those different kind of things. But as a graduate of Loma Linda University, he has a doctorate in clinical preventive medicine. And I'm a patient of his. My wife is a patient. My mom and my dad both were patients of his. Because he takes the realm that is normally just theoretical, that people will, they'll be talking about public health, they'll be talking about things that can be natural, but he actually puts it into practice and helps many others to be able to do that. Now, I can tell you that in his clientele, he has many medical doctors that come to seek his counsel on natural methods. Probably one of the things that came out of the pandemic was the use of Zoom. And Zoom has really revolutionized the number of people that are able to get the benefit of working with Dr. Youngberg, because they can be anywhere in the world, for that matter, and can consult with him via the new systems where they've got private Zoom links. But I have just really appreciated that. I've worked together with him on 2 books that have been bestsellers. We're almost sold out of one. I haven't even told you that yet, but we're down to like 55 copies of Goodbye Diabetes in total inventory right now. But we've worked with those. You probably, if you've seen the Naturally Gourmet cooking show, Wes co-hosted that with Karen when they did that. It was the #1 program on the Hope Channel for 6 or 7 years. He has done that in adding color to the entire cooking school process. But in addition to that, he has done many, many lectures here and around the world, for that matter, whether it's be in Dubai or in Prague or wherever else. Karen and Wes have worked together in several places, Nashville and several other places where they've shared a venue. But I just want to tell you that I'm very proud that Dr. Youngberg is a part of Fallbrook. And I know that today, as we're getting ready, even though today here in Fallbrook, for those of you who are watching, we're in the 90s here, so it seems like summer, but we're coming into fall where there's going to be the challenges of a changing season, and immunity is going to be really important. And I know today that Dr. Youngberg is going to talk about natural ways to keep our immunity high and to boost it. And I know that you're going to enjoy it. So please welcome, at this time, Dr. Wes Youngberg.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. Yeah, it is warm. I'm already starting to sweat. So I might have to get rid of my coat here in a little bit. This is a topic, even though I was really busy over the last few weeks during talks elsewhere on issues of Alzheimer's prevention and management, etc. And my brain energy was kind of low a couple of weeks ago, but when I realized what was going on in the summer, the infectious disease rates this summer has been much higher than normal summers. And normally you don't have infectious diseases going on in the summer. But we saw upticks all around the world, especially in Europe, where they're paying attention. Doctors have noticed that, and hospitalists have noticed that there's a big uptick of infections during the summer months, and you don't typically see those type of infections during the summer months. And so it is expected, because of that, and for various reasons that we'll touch on this afternoon, that there's going to be a big uptick come fall and winter. And so a lot of places are already seeing it because their weather is a lot cooler than it is here in Southern California. So I felt strongly that I should address this now and basically send this out in links to my patients all around the country, because if there's anything we need to understand, we need to figure out how to optimize our immune system right now, in part because there's actually a new pandemic. Have you heard about the pandemic of immune deficiency? There's a huge problem with immune deficiency, and there's various things that cause immune deficiency that we're going to be touching on this afternoon. So we need to be aware of what is causing the problems, and then secondarily, we need to be aware of what to do about it. So I'm going to jump right in here, and I have a lot of information to cover. I've been up since 5:30 this morning working on this talk until just now. Nonstop. Okay, well, I had breakfast, but no lunch. Just working on this. So a lot of this is new. It's a completely new organized program, and let's just jump right in. So what's next, right? And this is not about fear-mongering. I will not do that. This is all about hope. This is all about making sure that we're in charge. We're not victims any longer of a weak immune system, but we are basically masters of our immune system and learning how to optimize them in every way possible. As promised on the flyers, I'm going to be talking about how to really treat any infection, okay, how to optimize especially our body's ability to prevent and fight respiratory infections, because that's a big one, gastrointestinal infections. A lot of COVID going around right now actually has a big component with gastrointestinal. Okay, and so it's just a different manifestation that has actually been there all along. I will share with you in a little bit. I had at the very beginning, in early 2020, I had a mother from Mexico City called me with a translator, just so distraught because she had had COVID in early 2020, and then her 11-year-old daughter didn't get any symptoms except diarrhea. A week later, she had type 1 diabetes. And it was because of COVID. It was because of the COVID infection. The virus for this young girl basically devastated her immune system, probably because she had certain deficiency syndromes that had not been addressed effectively earlier. And we know from many studies that one thing, if she'd just done one thing a few months prior on a daily basis, and I will actually tell, if she'd just taken vitamin D for a couple months prior to that infection, she probably would not, 90% chance she would not have gotten type 1 diabetes. And I'm not just speculating on that. There's actually good studies that show that 90% of type 1 diabetes is preventable if you just optimize vitamin D. Some of the biggest studies ever done, actually even 30 years ago. We've known this for a long, long time. We just haven't, as a public health system, incorporated that knowledge properly into public health guidelines. And so, God says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. And so that's what I'm here. I'm here to just share information with you because I want you, as far as possible, to know why things happen and what to do about it, to prevent and treat when it happens. Okay, so bottom line is, as I was preparing for this over the week, looking at the latest studies, I get dozens of emails every day from different medical journals, from different researchers, from different doctors who specialize in these areas, and I was kind of like startled a little bit to learn that just a couple days ago there was a big Marburg virus outbreak in Rwanda. And so I started looking into it. Marburg virus is a hemorrhagic fever virus, which is like Ebola. It's not something anybody would ever want, right? Where you start bleeding from every orifice, and it's really, really bad. And so obviously, you want to prevent something like that, but you also want to know if there's a problem of that spreading wherever it's spreading, you want to make sure that you understand how it spreads. Of course, in this case, the good news is that it doesn't appear to spread very easily at all in terms of it doesn't aerosolize. At least we don't think it does at this point, and hopefully it will never, quote, mutate into that. The problem is not natural mutation. The problem is, as you'll see in a minute, researchers messing with viruses in the lab and causing gain of function changes in viruses that now make them much more effective to other animals and humans. And this is not me speculating. I'll show you the data. I'll show you people that you've heard many times on the news who past directors of the CDC saying this. So I want you to understand this so that we can be ready, because we're going to have more viruses coming our way, not because they've evolved, but because they have actually been made that way. Okay, so we need to have the armamentarium of what to do about that. For instance, just in the headlines in the last few days, Marburg virus death toll in Rwanda rises to 11. It's basically like a 23+% case fatality rate. In other words, roughly 1 out of 4 people who get infected die from it. And so, fortunately, it doesn't spread very easily, and it's so deadly that it doesn't have time to spread like viruses, like, for instance, COVID itself. Even though it's a problem, it's not so deadly, especially if you're in a preventive mode on it. Okay. There's calls now, how come we don't have a vaccine for Marburg virus? What's interesting that is I actually didn't know what I'm going to tell you next until a few days ago. So I started looking at, okay, well, how do we deal with Marburg if the rare chance that actually spreads this direction? It probably won't, but if it did, what would happen? Again, people that are more susceptible are those that are not super well nourished. In other words, they have deficiency syndromes. They may be low in vitamin A, they may be low in selenium, they may be low in zinc and other key nutrients that predispose them to actually get infected and progress into illness much more rapidly than other people. And that's why in some areas of the world, the case fatality rate for viruses that are actually otherwise rare are actually quite high. And so we're going to be talking about what to do about that. Well, as I was researching this, I actually, believe it or not, I was on Wikipedia. It's not a source of knowledge that I go to first, but it just happened to pop up first. So I said, okay, let's see what Wikipedia says about this. And they pointed out that the very first Marburg virus outbreak was, of course, in the town of Marburg, Germany. That's why they named it the Marburg virus. And guess where it occurred? It occurred in a large building, a corporation that focused on vaccine research. And that's like, I mean, I can't make this up, right? And they were actually doing research on vaccines using green monkeys, and individuals that they said that people that were exposed to green monkey tissue actually in the lab came down, about 30-some individuals came down with the infection and 7 died. This is 1967, and I didn't know about this until 2 days ago. That's how little this information comes out. And so you'll see why this is important a little bit when you hear what Dr. Redfield, former director of the CDC, says about this. So let's just go on. Back in January, as I was preparing to do a big series for an organization in Sandpoint, Idaho, I was actually in the airport just doing research online while I was waiting to get on the plane, and I came across this new study that tied in directly. I was doing a comprehensive series on what do we do to protect our brain? How do we prevent Alzheimer's? How do How do we slow down progression of cognitive decline? How do we stop it if possible? And how do we begin to reverse it? What are the tools that we can use for that? Well, this study kind of blew my mind, pun intended, because let me just read it for you real quick. So this is entitled, this is a published paper, Lethal Infection of Human ACE2. These are the receptors that COVID attaches to in the body. ACE2 transgenic mice caused by SARS-CoV-2 related pangolin coronavirus, okay, called GXP2V. We'll just call it GX for now. So as I was reading, let me just read this to you. SARS-CoV-2 related pangolin coronavirus, GX, can cause 100% mortality. Okay, now, so this is, you can get into fear-mongering pretty quickly when you start hearing stuff like this, but the key is to understand what's happening and why and what we do about it. Okay, and so 100% mortality in, get this, human ACE2 transgenic mice. Now, what this means is that the researchers had actually put genes into these mice that were human genes for the human ACE2 receptor. Now, you think that's wise? They're actually basically making the mice human-like. And you can understand it from a research standpoint because they want to see, will this virus, okay, will it infect humans? Because they're injecting this into mice that have the human ACE2 receptor, which is the receptor that when the spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 attaches to it, it basically gets it into the cell. So it's the ACE2 receptor is one of the main ways the virus causes damage in the body. Okay, so they said that this was potentially attributable to late-stage brain infection. Also, great. So the researchers created and modified a virus in the lab that can cause a brain infection. Do you think that's going to be good for Alzheimer's risk? Absolutely. That's going to be like one of the worst things possible. Any infection in the body is horrible for Alzheimer's. Risk and management. Any infection, a urinary tract infection, really bad for the brain. Any infection. I know that because I work with Alzheimer's patients every day. Okay, so then they went on to say this underscores, this is what the researchers are saying based on their own research and what they've done. They say a spillover risk of GX into humans and is potentially is possible, they're saying, and provides a unique model for understanding the pathogenic mechanism of SARS-CoV-2 related viruses. Well, yes, thank you very much for creating a virus in the lab that now has the potential to spill over and cause serious damage to people's brains and cause death within a week. Okay, so I just remember have you heard of righteous indignation? Okay, I don't like being negative. I don't like being, I don't like feeling upset about things. But when I hear about something like this, it really upsets me. I mean, did we learn nothing from this pandemic, right? So, all right, let's keep going. So basically, this was published earlier this year in January. Okay, they did an intranasal, in other words, it's aerosolized. It went right through their snoots. And again, it was humanized, mice made to be more human-like genetically. Okay, and so within 8 days, 100% lethal, and from acute neurotoxic brain infection. All right, so highly neurotoxic. By day 3, they could already see the damage being done to the brain. It's a horrible, horrible virus. And you know, they actually explained how they developed this. They basically cultured, in quotes, which is another way of saying it's a form of, it's a way of gain-of-function research. They cultured in the lab 2 amino acid spike protein mutations, just 2. And that made it seriously problematic. And again, they highlighted the possibility that this could spill over into humans. And so, all right, so now this is Dr. Robert Redford. So many of you have I'm sure seen him on TV. He became the director of the CDC in 2018. He had a long history in AIDS and HIV research. He's a virologist. And he was the CDC director during the first phase of the pandemic, but he ended up having to step down basically because he was not really happy with the way things were going. He wasn't in agreement with the kind of status quo or the narrative that was going on. So that's why he's the former CDC director. Well, here's in an interview just recently in May of 2024, these are the things that he said. You can even look this up on the internet. He said, first of all, I'm obviously most worried about bird flu. Now, even here in California, there's talk about bird flu, and bird flu now has, quote, mutated to the point where cattle are getting it, right? And so people that work with cattle are now potentially susceptible to bird flu. And the concern is this going to basically get to humans as well? So Dr. Redfield, here's what he says about it. Right now, it takes a 5 amino acid change, this is the sequence in the proteins, to make it effectively to infect humans. Now, he said that's a pretty heavy species barrier. In other words, in the world of adaptation, natural adaptation, it takes decades and hundreds, if not thousands of years sometimes, for these viruses to mutate so significantly that 5 different amino acids have to be changed. The likelihood of that happening by chance is very, very low. But look what he said next. The next thing he said, but in the laboratory, I could make it highly infectious to humans in months. Wow, just the fact that he was willing to be truthful and say that, certainly not politically correct to say that, because they want to be able to do whatever they want in the research, and they don't want to be necessarily held accountable for that. Okay, so he's basically calling this out, says, so that's why he's 100% against allowing this type of research to go on. And technically there's laws against it, but nobody's stopping them. Okay, so he made a point in this interview in May of 2024 that he's very disappointed with the lack of honesty among public agencies and basically telling people what they need to know. And then the fifth point he made in this interview is, so I don't think that research should be done. That's the real threat. That's the real biosecurity threat, that these university labs are doing these bioexperiments that are intentionally modifying viruses. And I think bird flu is going to be the cause of a great pandemic. Okay, now, again, what do we do about this? Do we just go home and stress about it? And I'm going to share with you things that I think will work very effectively against bird flu, just like it worked against COVID for those who actually took advantage of it. So now, just more recently, in an interview with Chris Como, interestingly enough, he said these things. He said there was a decision not to do anything that made the vaccine look like it didn't work. We all know that, of course, and he's just admitting it. He's acknowledging it. The spike protein, he said, is immunotoxic. And as I work with patients, I have, my job when I work with patients is tell them what the latest data shows and what's best for them. Okay, my job is not to be politically correct. My job is not to just do whatever some agency says. My job is to make sure that I'm doing what is best for that individual in front of me. And so, which is a critical thing that we do. So Dr. Redfield is pointing out that the spike protein, okay, whether you get infected, it's immunotoxic. If you give a vaccine, it's the spike protein that is being generated, and so it's immunotoxic. And by the way, it's not just immunotoxic, which is bad enough. It's actually toxic for everything. It's a toxin. Every tissue it touches is toxic. The heart, the brain, the pancreas, the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. If we had time, I'd show you study after study that shows that when spike protein is actually damaging to the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. That's why that 11-year-old in Mexico City ended up with type 1 diabetes, where now she has to take insulin for the rest of her life, is because she had a COVID infection that was not quickly addressed. And within a week's time, and she had susceptibilities, clearly, because not everybody who gets COVID gets type 1 diabetes. That's obvious. Okay, but so now this is something interesting that Dr. Redfield said. So when I give you the mRNA vaccine, I don't know how much spike protein you're producing. He goes on to say, oops. Okay. Somehow I got to the beginning of my. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so because when I give you the mRNA vaccine, then your body goes and makes it. Okay, that's the whole point of mRNA, is in that lipid nanoparticle, that little microscopically small envelope of fat that carries the modified messenger RNA to wherever it ends up, and it can end up anywhere, including the brain. It's important to understand that the lipid nanoparticle was originally designed by medical researchers to carry chemo to the brain, which means it's going to carry the modified messenger RNA to the brain and other organs as well. But once in the brain, it's toxic to the brain. That's what Dr. Redfield here is saying. Okay, and of course, we've known this for a couple of years already, but very few people are actually saying that. Okay, so it's important for you to know so that you can make good decisions about what you do and what you don't do. He says you may make it for a week, you may make it for a month. Actually, there's no research saying that it ever ends. That's the problem. Okay, and so we need to have a plan, which we'll get to in a little bit. I used the protein vaccine, he says. This is what he does. He says, so in other words, he does not use the mRNA vaccine anymore. He said, yeah, I took it myself, I gave it to my patients, but now that I know what I know, I don't give that one anymore. So that's an important thing for you to be aware of. But what he uses is the protein vaccine, which means it's not changing your cells to start producing, who knows for how long, the spike protein. Okay, the vaccine itself gives you a limited amount of spike protein that therefore has its antigenic effect on the body, and the immune system makes antibodies, and in theory, that's a good thing. Well, and that's a whole other story. It's not necessarily a good thing. You'll see in a minute what my concerns are. Okay, so he says, so the Novavax, interestingly enough, is not mRNA. So if somebody had to do that or said they were going to do one or the other, obviously that's a better choice, but it's still a toxin. As Dr. Redfield pointed out, it's still a toxin, right? It's just not getting as much of it. Okay, so now it's not approved or licensed by the FDA. I just looked this up this morning. Not yet. Okay? But a lot of people are recommending that, even though it's not approved or licensed. It is, however, authorized for emergency use. But the issue is, what else is available that actually we know is effective in dealing with COVID, or any infection for that matter? Okay, so we'll get into that. So in this case, your body does not become a manufacturing plant for spike protein, which is obviously one of the first goals, is not to allow that. Okay, now we move to Dr. Paul Olfett. I've been paying attention to Dr. Paul Olfett since the very beginning of the pandemic, before there was a vaccine. He's one of the world's leading vaccinologists. He is a professor of vaccinology and virology at University of Pennsylvania Medical School. And you can see his interviews. He's, I believe, still sits on the FDA advisory committee, relative to all these issues. And he initially voted along with all the other advisors, the top researchers, that they voted unanimously to approve the Pfizer and then the Moderna mRNA vaccines. Over a year ago, in the early fall of 2023, he went on. This is actually a picture of that video that he did on the internet. He went on and said, I'm no longer recommending the boosters for everybody. So to be fair to his position, he was saying we should just reserve it only for those over 75 years of age or somebody who has major comorbidities, major complications. Now, I listened to him at the very beginning before the vaccine came out, and he was actually raising concerns about the vaccine. He was raising concerns about antibody-dependent enhancement, where the antibodies that are produced by the vaccine actually encourage the virus to get into the cell and infect the cell. I remember he was saying that back in 2020 before the vaccine came out. So I was paying attention to this, one of the world's top vaccinologists, and so that was one of the reasons that I paid attention and why I never recommended it, and why I didn't take it. But I remember thinking to myself, that whole process is, why would you recommend something that's actually creating toxicity in the body only to people who are already ill or elderly and have a depressed immune system? I'll let you ponder that thought for a minute, because we're going to get into other studies to help answer that question. And so basically, this is another picture of Dr. Paul Alfett and his position that was official about a year ago. So one reason I'm talking about this right now is because the new booster just came out. And I've had patients come to me who have serious issues with their health, tell me, I just got the booster 3 days ago. Okay? And I get it, because, obviously I'm the minority opinion here. I get that. I get that. So, and I'm good with that. But again, people need to understand there needs to be true informed consent about this. It's not just, hey, it'll be good for you, why don't you get it? They have no idea what might be coming. Okay, so now in those cases, I don't harass my patients who've done it. I'm here to help, right? I'm here to provide solutions, and we do. There are many things that can be done if you've done that, even once in the past. Okay, but the first step is Dr. Peter McCullough, which is one of the world's leading cardiologists, because we know that cardiologic problems are a major problem with the mRNA platform. He basically, his first step is don't do another one. That's the first step. Okay, don't keep adding more and more toxin to your body. Okay, so, all right, let's keep going. Now, who is at higher risk for spike protein pathology? In other words, who's at higher risk if you get an infection with a COVID virus? The COVID virus is coated with many of these spike proteins that actually cause the infection. They are the toxin of the virus. Okay, so the spike protein, or the infection, is not just, it's just like a cold. It seems like it, and many of us who have had COVID say, I've had colds that were far worse, and that's true. But the point is that the spike protein is a toxin like none other that persists and causes damage over time that could be very, very serious for complications later on, including immune deficiency problems. Okay, so we should not take a COVID infection lightly, but we have to come up with a good, effective plan. Okay, so what are the risk factors? So in the individual with chronic unresolved medical conditions, and of course this is all even the normal narrative as well. Anybody with diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, insulin resistance, cancer, and even if it's in remission, autoimmunity, any kind of autoimmune condition, like most thyroid problems are actually autoimmune. Dry eye syndrome is an autoimmune issue. There's all kinds of autoimmune issues that we don't even test for. that are present in individuals. Chemically sensitive patients, etc. Those who have genetic mutations like the MTHFR or the PON1, the mutation that decreases the ability to repair DNA, or the pony mutation decreases the ability to break down pesticides and herbicides properly. That's a huge risk factor for complications when you're exposed to spike protein. ApoE4, which is the gene mutation associated with Alzheimer's risk that is significant. The glutamate or GAD mutations that increase the damage done by glutamate, which is an excital neurotoxin in the body. Okay, so anybody who has a first-degree relative that had any negative reaction to a COVID vaccine, or really any vaccine, then really needs to pay attention to this. And then those who have that skin hyperplasticity, that hypermobility, flexibility, connective tissue disorders, those in particular seem to have more problems. Okay, so we don't have time to get into some of this information about the differences in batches. Not all the batches had the same level of potential problems. Females are at higher risk than males. We're still trying to better understand that. The number of mRNA vaccines or boosters you've had, for people who've been vigilant about doing it, we're already up to 8 or 9, even though most people haven't done anywhere near that many, and we'll show you why. The reality is that the initial series, 80% of people said, oh, I better do it because otherwise I won't be able to travel, or there's a mandate or whatever. So 80% of the U.S. population did the initial series. The next year, it dropped down to 20%. Major drop-off. Even though it was highly, highly promoted, everybody's go like, I think I know more about it now. By 2023, last fall, it dropped down to under 10%. And of course, now you can't watch a football game without being inundated with commercials about it. So they're still pushing it, even though many, many doctors are going like, whoa, I think we went way overboard here. Other risk factors are those who are undernourished, or those that are more likely to have hypercaloric malnutrition. It's a kind of an interesting phrase that says you're getting a lot of calories, but very few of those calories are associated with nutrients that actually neutralize toxins. They protect you. They prevent deficiency diseases. It's critical to have the right nutrition, but that's different than being underweight, or being what we normally think of a malnourished individual or malnourished child as somebody who's wasting away and they're skinny. Okay, most malnutrition is actually related with excess weight, not underweight. So just be aware of that. So that's a big, big problem. It's much bigger than we realize for this problem. Okay, and then there's all kinds of lab tests like homocysteine, looking at copper-zinc ratio. Ceruloplasmin is the protein carrier for copper in the blood that determines whether your copper is mainly free-floating, which causes oxidative stress, or in this protein being carried properly. Looking at hsCRP, which is a measure of inflammation that's in the bloodstream or the whole body. Omega check is looking at, do you have adequate omega-3, EPA, or DHA fats in your blood? And we could talk a whole hour about that, but that's a critical test. I do all these tests for every patient, and that test in particular, almost everybody's deficient in the omega-3s. Almost everybody. Okay, and that's a major protection for the brain and the immune system and the cardiovascular system. So make sure that you're getting adequate DHA and EPA omega-3 fats. That is critical. D-dimer. I've been practicing for 35 years, and I never used to check the D-dimer, because that's not part of my preventive or lifestyle medicine practice typically. Now I check it in almost every patient. D-dimer is a blood test that tells us whether your body's breaking down a blood clot. You think it's important to know that? Yeah, especially nowadays when blood clots are extremely common compared to even 4 years ago. Blood clots are way, 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 way more common. I have patients come in and we check, and their D-dimer is high. I immediately send them back to their primary doctor or to the ER to get checked out further. And you get an ultrasound, make sure they don't have a blood clot forming in their leg or somewhere else. And many people, because of acute COVID, which are just barely symptomatic, they already have multiple micro blood clots in their lungs, okay, which could easily lead to a major problem. So if you ever have shortness of breath, for instance, that's one consideration. Maybe there's a blood clot, there's these micro blood clots forming in the lungs that are impairing blood flow and oxygenation of the tissues. The viral panels, the vitamin D, of course, the hemoglobin A1C looks at average blood sugar, actual glucose tolerance testing, blood sugars and insulin testing to make sure, just because your fasting blood sugar is in the optimal range doesn't mean you're good. In fact, much of the time, it's one of the least sensitive tests to see if your blood sugars are good. You want to check your blood sugars after a meal, like at 1 hour or 2 hours after eating some sweets or drinking a soda to see does your blood sugar shoot way up in that. And in the lab, we check the insulin at the same time. Okay, so we'll come into some of the key strategies of what to do about that in a second. Now, here's an important study that I think it would be critical for you to understand in order for you to recognize the importance of what I'm saying. Okay, I don't expect you to just buy into what I'm saying just because I'm saying it, especially if you don't know me and, who is this guy saying all this stuff, right? I mean, how do you know I'm telling you what's right? Maybe I sound sincere, and I hope I do sound sincere, because I am. But people can be sincerely wrong as well. So don't just accept what I say because I'm saying it. Check it out. Just like in any area of your life, you got to check it out. And don't check it out on the internet by looking at factcheck.org. Well, you can do that, but you'll get a lot of different opinions than what I'm saying right now if you do that. Okay, so be careful. Who are the fact checkers for the fact checkers that are fact checking the fact checkers, right? So you got to understand, and this is a whole different talk that I won't get into right now, is that fact checkers are paid by somebody. Enough said. Okay, so that's why we have to figure out what truth is, not by just asking or checking somebody that says they're a fact checker, because that doesn't really mean anything. Okay, so here's a really interesting study, and the study was done by the Cleveland Clinic, and I have a real interest in this because I have a very close friend who has worked for decades for the Cleveland Clinic. And as an administrator, and they explained to me, says, this was right during the mandates, during 2020, end of 2021, 2022, when the mandates were really hitting hard, and the federal government was really coming down hard on mandates. And this individual told me, they said, Wes, our organization, Cleveland Clinic in this case, that employs 52,000 individuals. They're considered to be the second most reputable clinic in the world, medical system in the world. They never wanted to mandate the vaccine. So I said, well, why did they mandate it then? And it says the same reason everybody else did. I go well, what's that? He says, because the federal government told them that if they didn't mandate it, they would not pay them a cent of their Medicare, what they owed them for Medicare. Most medical institutions get up to 80% of their total revenue from the government. You think that has anything to do with corporate policy in the medical system? Okay, so what really warmed my heart is that Cleveland Clinic and the experts in infectious disease and biostatistics at the Cleveland Clinic, they said, okay, we'll do a study. Okay, and this was one of the most amazing studies. And as soon as the study came out, all kinds of doctors and fact checkers started saying vaccine study that has people worried is being misinterpreted. And the thing about fact checkers is they have a gift about telling the truth in a way that deceives people. When I was in my public health training at Loma Linda University, one of the books that the head researcher, the director of the Adventist Health Study, which is one of the biggest studies ever ongoing in the world, he and I ended up working with him on the faculty after I graduated. Dr. Jan Kuzma, and he required buying a book that's called How to Lie with Statistics. So it's a little book that was part of his biostatistical epidemiologic courses that I took almost every research class I could take at Loma Linda. And at the time, I didn't realize how important that was going to be for me later on. And so, because my interests were mainly in clinical work, but that book basically showed you how it's easy for a researcher or anybody who has a vested interest to make you think something different than is actually true, but they can do it without lying or by giving you facts, but making you think that what they said was something else. And that's what, by the way, is called marketing. It's called marketing, called propaganda. And every organization that wants to promote whatever they're selling actually follows these same principles. It's called marketing. So just be aware that there was all kinds of propaganda saying, oh, this study from the Cleveland Clinic that looked at 52,000 employees that was published by the Cleveland Clinic, they were saying ignore it. It doesn't mean anything. And so here's the Department of Infectious Diseases, the Qualitative Health Sciences Department participated, occupational health obviously participated because it was an occupational health issue. So they went on to, this is actually the graph that I wanted you to see. They basically they had all the data on all their employees and who got the vaccine and how many times and when and how often they got COVID. They had all the data because they were the employer. Okay? And what kind of amazed so many people, it didn't really amaze me, but I love the fact that they published it. And I love the fact that they actually were able to publish it because a lot of people that did this research were not able to publish it. But they were the Cleveland Clinic. Okay, so they found bottom line is this. For every single mRNA vaccine that was given, there was a 100% increase in the future risk of somebody coming down with COVID. Okay? In other words, it's completely contrary to what the narrative was. Okay? So why am I telling you this? Okay? I'm telling you this because you need to know this to make a decision. So if your goal is to decrease your risk of getting infections, what does this study say? Okay? If you did it twice, if you had two vaccines, you were 200% more likely. It got to the point where if you had four or more total vaccines, including the boosters, you were 350% more likely to get COVID later on. I wish that they would have published research on other infections, because here's the reality. Okay, all the evidence points to it actually increases all infections, not just COVID. But the fact that it increased COVID, the very thing that it was being said actually was being 95% effective against, that was a great example of misleading with statistics. Okay, now let's keep going. So this is, probably can't see this for real. Let me read. There was a follow-up study published in September 2023, so a year ago. And they came up with two different summaries. And I remember I caught this as I was looking at the different presentations on this study. The first summary said this: among the 48,000 plus working age Cleveland Clinic employees, those up to date on COVID-19 vaccination did not lower their risk of COVID-19 than those not up to date. So it's like, why are you saying it that way? Come on, they speak plain English. Okay, but even after saying that, they said the current CDC definition provides meaningless classification of risk for COVID-19 in the adult population. Whoa. That's something that most peer reviewers would say, take that out of the study. So I don't know how that stayed in the study, but it was an interesting comment. Then they flipped it and they said it the way most of us would talk. They said among the 48,000+ working age, this is 18 to 65, employees of the Cleveland Clinic, those not up to date on COVID-19 had lower risk of COVID-19 than those who are up to date. Again, the current definition of CDC in terms of the need for the vaccine is meaningless. Now, I wouldn't have called it meaningless, but that's what they called it. Okay, now, so let's move into what we do about it. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you context for why we do the rest of this. There has been many, many presentations and articles and papers and review studies outlined in the peer-reviewed medical literature about what to do with what is called spikeopathy. The spikeopathy is just a medical way of saying spike protein, whether from the infection or the vaccine, is toxic, and we need to do everything possible to denature, to neutralize, to change that risk. Okay, so what do we do about it? Now, there was an interesting study, which if you look at this carefully, you can see that this was redacted or this was retracted 8 months after it was published. The journal Viruses in 2021 published this. It was submitted in August of 2021. They reviewed it for 2 or more months by peer review. They approved it. They published it in October of 2021, and then in May of 2022, apparently somebody made a phone call and said, this paper has to be retracted, and they did. This is why many editors-in-chief of medical journals are saying it's really hard to know what you can believe anymore, even in the published medical journals. They're actually saying that, and I have documents on that. We just don't have time to get into that. So it ultimately is like, how do we know who to believe? That's the challenge. And here, the short answer is you believe those that you can trust. How do you know you can trust somebody? By spending enough time with them and listening to what they say so that you know that they have integrity. Because when something comes up that is uncomfortable or challenging, they still stick to the truth no matter what, even if it makes them look bad. That's how you know you can trust somebody. Somebody is willing to take a hit and actually even lose a position or lose their job over what is right. That's how you know that you can actually trust somebody. Of course, there's other ways, okay? But the point is that it's hard to know who you can trust these days. And again, I don't expect you to trust me if you don't know me, okay? But if you know me long enough, I would hope that you trust me, okay? So, because hopefully I have integrity enough to tell you what actually I understand to be true. Okay, so this paper that was retracted. It was retracted for a reason, because it said it documented in their research that and this was actually from Stockholm University, Department of Molecular Biosciences. These were top researchers and Department of Clinical Microbiology in Sweden. So these were really top researchers. And they were saying that the reason it was retracted because, remember what Dr. Redfield said in his interview that came much later than this? It said that there was a very strong censoring scenario going on to make sure that nothing came out that made it look like there was a problem. So like Ronald Reagan used to say, you know, what did he call it? Two things that you don't ever want to hear is that Hello, somebody at your door and say, hello, we're from the government and we're here to help you. Okay, I lived in Nashville for 2 years. Okay, so we'll get to that a little bit later. And so I'm very, very upset what's going on in Nashville right now, or the lack of things that are going on in Nashville right now. Because I lived there in Asheville for 2 years, and I have property near Asheville. In fact, my brother's there right now. So here's the bottom line. This study showed that they said that we found that the spike protein, back to the spike protein toxin, localizes in the nucleus of the cells and inhibits DNA damage repair. Okay? Again, this is not my idea of what might happen. This is what the researchers were documenting. And they're impeding key DNA repair proteins, BRCA1. Anybody here ever hear of BRCA? That's the breast cancer tumor suppressor gene. If you have a mutation to the breast cancer gene, okay, if you have a mutation to the breast cancer suppressor gene, I should say, that's bad, because that means you're much more likely to get breast cancer or uterine cancer, or ovarian cancer. And so what they're finding here is that even if you don't have the mutation, if you get exposed to too much spike protein for too long, or even for a short time for some people, you're actually significantly depressing the very gene that suppresses cancer. In other words, it's encouraging cancer. It's a form of immunosuppression that's very, very serious. And it also affects the p53 gene, which is a critical gene in suppressing cancer. So the very genes that, if turned on, if we're doing everything right to activate those genes, if those genes are suppressed, then we don't really have a chance to get through that without potential problems. So the protein that suppresses uncontrolled cell division and growth that occurs in cancer, those are the BRCA1 and the p53 genes. And then that basically turbo cancers are being reported by oncologists like Dr. William Makis. We're seeing cancer growth within a few months that normally would take a year, and growth in a year that would normally take a decade or 2 decades. Okay, so, and by the way, I see this on a regular basis in my practice. I don't actually treat cancer, but a lot of people with cancer come to me because they know I'm interested in optimizing the immune system. So I say, I'll help you improve your immune system, but legally I don't treat cancer, okay, for those type of reasons. Okay, now, the other aspect of this in terms of damage and toxicity is this study that was published in 2023, okay, that showed that there's a potential role of the spike protein in neurodegenerative disease. Now, I love that when studies use nebulous terms like the potential role. That clearly was modified during the peer review process. Kind of toned that down, okay, make it look like we're just studying the issue. But there's clearly a neurodegenerative process going on. I first realized this in April, May of 2021. I've been working, I probably spend most of my time clinically helping people who have either a family history of Alzheimer's or early signs and symptoms of some type of dementia, or even advanced forms of dementia. That's what I spend 80% of my time with. And so I had a lot of patients that had been doing really well for a year, 2 years, that were excited. They were actually doing better on their cognitive tests. They were much more functional than they had been 2-3 years before. They're really happy with how things were working out. And all of a sudden, boom, they took a big downturn. And I remember I was just kind of like stunned that patient after patient I was seeing are saying, hey, I was doing really good, and something's happened. This program you have me on is not working anymore. All right, so my job is to connect the dots and figure out what's going on. And what did I miss something? Are they forgetting to do something? Do I need to do additional testing? What is going on? And then it took me literally 2 months to figure it out. I was kicking myself afterwards. I realized, as I was connecting the dots and trying to think through this collectively, I realized that those patients had recently had the mRNA vaccine. Now, I'm not saying that everybody with the mRNA vaccine is going to have a problem. That's clearly not true. Of course, we don't know what the long-term issues are. We're concerned about that for these obvious reasons. But bottom line, again, what are the things we can do? So this is where we get into hope. What do we do now? I love the verse in Jeremiah that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not harm you, plan to give you hope and a future." So our job in the clinical field is first do no harm. And then the corollary to that is that we should at least do something good too, in addition to not doing any harm. Okay, so what do we do? This reminds me of, the story when Jesus was approached by the teachers of the law, and they were kind of trick him, to kind of catch him in a no-win answer, like, what's the most important commandment? And of course, Jesus, without missing a beat, he says that there are two greatest commandments. The first is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is like unto the first, says love your neighbor as yourself. So then he said, the whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. Well, I love this story because it ties into the health picture. What are the most important commandments, if you will, for health and healing? What are the fundamental, most important issues in health and healing? And this actually comes from one of my favorite professors. He was I would watch him on the internet back. This is 25 years ago. He was like a Norman Rockwell of medical professors. He had all these witticisms, and he was so interesting to listen to, so wise. And he was a professor of medicine at Yale University School of Medicine until he retired. He's long gone. He was old when I first started watching him 25 years ago. But he said, optimal health and the potential here requires that we must first provide all the necessary elements to optimize the system. And number two, remove any interfering elements. Those are the two fundamentals. So everything comes back to those two things. Okay, so there's some things that we want to remove the interfering elements. We need to understand what those are. What are the toxins? And there's many potential toxins above and beyond what I've shared today so far. But the timeliness is the issue with what I've addressed today. So let's look at this. He says nutrients are the necessary elements. Now, nutrients in the broadest sense of the term, not just physical, food-related nutrients, but anything that nourishes the body. When you say a kind word to somebody, that's nourishing. When I reach down and touch my dog and pet her with love, that's nourishing her physically and emotionally. Okay, when we say to somebody, when we smile to somebody and say, "Hey, how you doing today? You look great." That's nourishing to them. So it's nourishing in the broadest sense of the term. When we ask somebody for forgiveness, that is not only nourishing, but that is removing one of the worst toxins that person could be exposed to. The toxin of unforgiveness. And that's a whole nother topic, right, that we will address sometime in the future. I love the topic of forgiveness because literally there's many studies on forgiveness. If you struggle with forgiveness, that's one of the biggest toxins in your life right now. Okay, so we'll get to that later. And then number two, toxins are the interfering elements. Toxins in the broadest sense of the term, not just glyphosates and mold-related toxins and pesticides and heavy metals. Those are the toxins we think about most often in a medical sense. Okay, but there are many, many, many toxins. And by the way, I hate to admit it, but sugar and fructose are one of the most common toxins that people consume on a regular basis. Okay, and that's especially true when it comes to neurotoxicity. There's all kinds of studies that I could share with you that we don't have time for to document that. Okay, So Dr. Sid Baker, one of his witticisms is he called it the thumbtack rules. He said that if you're sitting on a tack, it's going to take a lot of aspirin to make you feel better, right? And so you get that. So the point is, if you're sitting on a tack, don't treat the symptom, address the cause. Otherwise, you're really not going to be better. You might feel better temporarily, but you're never really going to get better. Okay, but then the corollary to that is if you're sitting on 2 tacks, removing just one of them does not result in a 50% improvement. Okay, but what if you're sitting on 8 tacks or 12 tacks or 30 tacks? The biggest challenge that we have in health and healing is that we try something and we say, that didn't work. We stop that, we go another route, we try that didn't work. And then we keep looking for something that works, thinking that there's just one thing that's going to work, and that's rarely the case. Okay, you have to address all the underlying risk factors, as many as you can, rather. Otherwise, you're really never going to reach that tipping point that allows your body to begin healing. Okay, so that's a really, really critical. So everything else we say today focuses on these 2 things. Okay, removing the interfering elements and optimizing the nutrients that neutralize toxins and optimize healing potential. Okay, so real quickly, how many of you were here, was it last week with Dr. Kuninobu? Okay, quite a few of you. He actually dealt with this topic in depth, so I'm not going to elaborate on it. He went over the 8 natural remedies, the New Start principles. That's on YouTube, by the way, on the Fallbrook SDA Church channel. If you missed Dr. Andrew Kuninobu's, he's the medical director of the New Start program at Weimar Institute up north. And so, bottom line, and I remember reading these when I was younger, and you just kind of read them really quick. Oh, that's interesting. I want to emphasize here today, if we're not following these principles, don't expect to get the optimal benefit from any other principle I discuss. In other words, the simple remedies operate in the context of us paying attention to the fundamentals. So make sure you pay attention to the fundamentals. And this is from a book, Ministry of Healing. It's a book that I read when I was a young teenager. It changed my life. I was really interested in this topic because my mother had died of brain cancer when I was 10. And I was always asking the question, why did she die? What can I do to make sure it doesn't happen to me? And then as I grew up, I said, what can I do to help people go through life so they don't suffer the way my mom suffered? Okay? So this book, Ministry of Healing, which is actually a Christian book, is talking about the ministry of Jesus, but in a holistic perspective, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It's a wonderful book, regardless of your worldview, even if you're not a Christian. Don't worry about it. Just read the book. I think you'll find it fascinating. And this is one of the statements in that book on page 127. She says, pure air, sunlight, and we could talk for hours about the power of sunlight. There's new research showing that if you just spend time in the sun, actually I've known this for over a decade, if you spend 30 to 45 minutes in the sun, that'll help. If you're struggling with weight loss, that'll help you lose weight faster than walking during that time. Of course, the goal is to be on the sun while you're walking. Okay, so but the being exposed to near-infrared light in the early morning powerfully alters your immune system. It gives you nutrients. It literally nourishes your mitochondria, the very organelles in every cell of the body that make energy. They take fat and glucose and turn it into ATP energy. The only way the immune system can operate if it has lots of ATP. And the best way to do that is optimize all these things, but optimize your exposure to bright light. If you tend to be sickly, if you tend to be fatigued, if you tend to get sick easily, if you're starting to have symptoms of any infection at all, spend as much time as you can outside. It doesn't have to be in direct midday sun. You can be in the shade. Just being outside dramatically improves your immune system. Just being outside. Okay, so, and you'll see that in a minute why that is. Proper diet, of course, right? The use of water in and out, trust in divine power, right? I mean, just trust, getting hope, feeling like there's purpose in life, all that by itself dramatically enhances the immune system. I have many books on this. It's called neuroendocrine immune, psychoneuroimmune immune activity. The impact of the psyche on the nervous system, on the endocrine hormonal system, and ultimately the immune system. Psychoneuroimmunology. That's been well studied now for over 30 years, actually 40 years now. Okay. Every person should have a knowledge of nature's remedial agencies and how to apply them. Okay, now, so here's some simple remedies. Hot and cold contrast water treatments. Okay, so if you think you're a lost cause relative to health, think again. You can actually dramatically improve your health. Just like every morning, by the way, when I shower, I turn it as hot as I can take it for at least 3 minutes, and then I end with all the way cold. So I'm at least doing one phase of hot-cold therapy. That all by itself activates your innate immune system, which if you're starting to get sick, let's say you were exposed to some virus and you didn't know it, and that virus is starting to replicate in your system. You know that it takes a week before your immune system pays attention? At least in terms of COVID, it takes a whole week, and so it's not doing anything. It's not activating. It's not fighting the virus. It's kind of like going, I think I'll deal with that later. The immune system is literally procrastinating. But if you do a hot-cold therapy, or if you go out into sunshine for 20, 30 minutes in the early morning, that activates your immune system. It kind of reactivates. It resets your immune system. So now your immune system is starting to fight that virus before it would ever consider doing that. So these are very important principles. Vitamin D we'll look at. Iodine we'll look at. So I'm actually, if I had, there's preventive strategies, and I'll share with those in a second. And then there's if I had to choose 3 things to have in my home and in my car or whenever I travel, that would help protect me from acute illness, it would be charcoal, number 1. Activated powdered charcoal or capsules. I have a bottle of capsules of charcoal in my backpack whenever I travel. If I go speaking in Florida or somewhere in Dubai, we have charcoal. In fact, if I hadn't taken charcoal with us to Dubai, we wouldn't have been able to leave Dubai for about a week or 2 later. Because my wife got horrible gastroenteritis the afternoon before we were to fly out back to LA. And if she hadn't started taking charcoal immediately, she would have had to have been in the hospital. Okay, so I'm really grateful that we had charcoal. So charcoal is literally number 1. Right now, if anybody in Florida, Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina, etc., charcoal is the number 1 remedy to have. Because you know what? Gastroenteritis and all kinds of diarrheal diseases are going to go rampant because they don't have water, they don't have sewage, everything's messed up. That's going to be a huge problem unless they get that taken care of right away. So charcoal is whenever somebody travels anywhere, I'll go over that with you in a bit. Always take charcoal with you. And then iodine, number 2 maybe. Number 3 is to having an all-purpose disinfectant. You can get it called Safrex, chlorine dioxide tablets. Right, Scott? Okay. You can get very inexpensively. This is the best antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-mold, anti-odor that you could ever buy. It's extremely powerful. Do your own research. We don't have time to talk about it a lot today. Okay, but that's what I carry a little bottle with about 20 tablets in it. You can disinfect any water from any pond with just one of those tablets. Okay, it's a really good thing to have for all kinds of reasons. All right, so let's quickly Let's quickly go through let me see. I'm just going to run through this real quick. What are the lessons we learned from the Spanish flu and how we applied them during COVID early on? One of the main lessons we learned was discovered in this building. This was the Hutchinson, Minnesota Seventh-day Adventist Seminary. I was giving a talk on optimizing the immune system in this church about 18, maybe 15 years ago. And after I did the talk, this individual came up to me and he said, "Dr. Youngberg, are you aware of what happened in Hutchinson, Minnesota during the Spanish flu?" And I said, "No, I haven't." He says, "I'll send you the information." And he sent it to me, and I've been very grateful. And so we took advantage of this early on during the pandemic in early 2020, so there was 90 of 120 residents in this dormitory. How'd you like to be in this dormitory during the height of the Spanish flu? Okay, not a good place to be, especially in the wintertime. It doesn't look like a good place to be. So 90 of the students and faculty got sick with the Spanish flu. This is a very much more serious than COVID ever was. Okay, and so this ended up being published in the Hutchinson local paper. And so fortunately, they had a resident physician, Dr. Larson, who had this, what I call one of the original proactive multifactorial early treatment protocols. They didn't have any medications. They didn't have any nutritional supplements. All they had was just these basic fundamental methods, and it was extremely powerful. So the number one thing is rest. Now, when you hear like you're sick and you need to rest, you're going like, whatever. Right? I know. I feel the same way when I'm sick. I don't want to rest. I mean, it's okay to rest, but usually I want to do something. I want to get something done on the computer. So you're not really resting. And so here's the bottom line. The main reason people died during the Spanish flu and to a large extent during COVID is that they did not rest appropriately during the initial week of symptoms that they had. I believe that's one of the main reasons. Now, there's many mitigating factors in addition to that can make a difference. But I'm just saying that rest is not this take it or leave it. This is extremely important. I recently, this is maybe 3 weeks ago, I woke up and I didn't feel right. Okay, and I thought, well, I can still go to work. I didn't have any respiratory symptoms. I just had some weird GI issues, not diarrhea, just something I never had before. Something's wrong. I didn't feel right. I just felt a little off, a little bit of a headache. But I said, I can still go to work. And then I realized my own admonition. Okay, if I don't pay attention to this principle, I could actually get really sick. And so I actually made the decision to reschedule all my patients that day, thinking that I would be fine the next day. It took me a week. If I hadn't made that decision on day one, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. I don't know. It was really bizarre what I went through, and that's one of the reasons I'm so adamant about talking to you today on this point. So basically. So it wasn't just rest, it was complete bed rest, what they followed. And quiet was required. In other words, when we're sick, well, it's like this is a chance to catch up on the news. A lot of people just watch Netflix, whatever. They're not really resting, right? And so the nurse at that big establishment, she said, you made sure. She like Nurse Ratched, if you know what I mean by that term, making sure that the patients had complete rest to the point where they're bored to death, right? So they got real rest. Okay. Then they did hot, cold hydrotherapy, like I mentioned. No drugs were available, but with complete rest and quiet, the treatment included careful, regulated diet. In other words, they gave them very little to eat, because the body was in the repair mode, not in the eating mode, right? So when you're sick, only eat what you need in very, very small amounts, right? Just eat enough to have some energy, but not, because your body has to digest and process all that, and that takes a lot of energy that the immune system can't use at that time. What did most people who had COVID do? When they got sick, they got home and said, hey, that's great. We can order in, and we can, watch movies, and we can eat all our favorite foods, and the worst possible things that you can do if you're sick, right? But they didn't know because they weren't being educated properly. Okay, so they had this alternative to hot cold hydrotherapy treatments. By the way, about February of 2020, right here where I'm standing, we did a hydrotherapy clinic online. It was a 90-minute presentation, showed people exactly how to do what I'm telling you right now. You can still see it, but within a week and a half after that was done, it was taken off YouTube. And so the director of our IT, he actually complained to Google, said, this is a video on hydrotherapy. Like, why'd you take it down? And they said it's promoting violence in the community. So I said, we're not burning people up here. We're just providing therapeutic hot and cold treatments. And at the time, I didn't understand. I knew I was being censored because we weren't following the narrative, but it was really weird that we were being told that we were promoting violence in the community. And it was only a year and a half later or so that I figured out what that meant. Because when you don't follow the narrative, and hate speech is violence. So fortunately, that has toned down a little bit here in the last 2 years, but don't be surprised if that comes back, if that philosophy comes back with a vengeance, if something happens. Okay, so interesting. So in almost every case, body temperature is normalized within a day or two. Now, okay, then here's one of the key points I want to make here, is that the real danger was relapse to guard against the deadly rebound of the Spanish flu. That's what killed people. At the beginning of the pandemic in January of 2020, I went on Amazon and I bought 10 books on the Spanish flu. I wanted to really understand all the subtle realities of what was going on relative to the Spanish flu. See if I could pick up on things that could help me deal with COVID more effectively. And one of the key things that I picked up from reading those books was that people didn't die initially. They got better, they got sick, they got better, and they go, I think I'm okay now. I mean, I'm not perfect, but then they'd go out to eat, or they'd go out into the town, they'd go do something, and they would be too active, and the next day they're dead. They'd go to cytokine storm and die. Okay, so that rebound of not having adequate extra rest was the determining factor between life and death. So we need to know that. So we need to make sure we're resting long enough. So to guard against this rebound, every patient was required to remain in bed for an additional 2 to 5 days. Can you imagine? Your spouse or somebody saying, stay in bed, you can't go to work yet. I got to get to work. No, stay in bed. But that's what they did, and that's why not one person died of the Spanish flu in that organization. Not one. Okay, it reminds me that we actually really pitched these strategies heavily at the beginning of the pandemic right here in this church. Every week we would do a little 10-minute or so blurb about what to do and what not to do. And we didn't lose one regular member to COVID the entire time. Not one. And we had a very similar population than any other group of people. Okay, the only one person who died, I know why he died. He died from an Eliquis overdose. He died of a brain bleed, and they called it COVID. But I know he was my patient. I know it wasn't COVID. Because he was already way over COVID before that happened. Okay, anyways. So the extra rest. So here's the sum of this section. Okay, so this was written in the Hutchinson newspaper. Okay, and the editor of the paper, he said, as a result of this system of handling a disease that is scoring thousands of victims every day, there has not been one case that could have been called serious or a single death in the seminary, although there were more than 90 persons affected. What was the case fatality rate here? 0. Why? Because they had a system that worked. Okay, so they said this record is remarkable, and the last part's my favorite, is it makes the ordinary methods of dealing with the flu appear to be irrational. Okay, all right, so let's go to the next thing. What are some simple remedies? Vitamin D. This is really, really critical. Okay, so this is one of the preventive strategies. It's both preventive and therapeutic at the same time. But the best way to the old adage, Benjamin Franklin, he said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so this is true for vitamin D as well. Vitamin D is critical. So here's the bottom line. There's a lot of misinformation about vitamin D. And that's one reason I wanted to bring it up. Okay, and I'm not trying to be on my misinformation bandwagon here. I'm just trying to be honest with you. I've been studying vitamin D now for 25 years. Ever since that Harvard physician researcher in the late 90s actually did a study with the same data that was used to show the risk of smoking cigarettes and cancer, and they found that the risk of dying of cancer was higher for somebody who had low vitamin D compared to somebody who smoked. And I remember reading that back in 97, and I go, what? Because I was always helping people stop smoking, and I still do. And that study in no way said you should smoke. It just said, if you want to understand the toxicity or the deficiency problem of having low vitamin D, you need to recognize that that's a bigger issue to your health than whether you smoke or not. Okay, so if that doesn't cause you to stop and think about it a little bit, nothing will. Okay, I'll leave that one alone, but there's some interesting information on that. But bottom line is that just in the last 2 months, Medscape, which is one of my favorite sources of medical information, it's an online medical journal that has all disciplines. I get multiple emails every day from Medscape. And many of you health professionals may be in the room, you do as well. And it's a great way to get a concise update on many different topics. And they did a whole series on vitamin D that was scathing. I go like, whoa, what is up with that? They were basically saying, don't test vitamin D anymore. Literally, they were saying that. They were saying that there's really not any good evidence that taking vitamin D is really that beneficial. And you know what happened? So many doctors wrote back to them and said, what are you talking about? That's the most insane thing ever. I said, have you completely missed all the research done on this over the last 30 years? And so they actually had to backtrack and publish documents that were supportive of vitamin D from a professional, editorial standpoint, but in other words, from people that weren't part of the editorial staff, but that had written in. But they still had a whole bunch of other articles that follow it up that basically still said, don't mess with vitamin D. And of course, for doctors who don't have any experience, like young doctors coming out, they're just going to take that as like, this is what we're supposed to do. And that's going to change the culture of medicine over the years. And that's a real travesty. But here's one organization that has stood firm. It's the American Gerontological Society. They're not following the, quote, crazy government guidelines that say that you should get only about 400 to 700 units of vitamin D a day. I talked personally with the world's top researcher on vitamin D. Right here in San Diego, he was speaking at a conference. And Dr. Robert Heaney, from Creighton University. He was a professor of medicine. He had published hundreds of studies on vitamin D. He was the world's leading expert. He sat on the FDA Nutrition Board. They never accepted his position, even though he was the only person on the board who had done any research on vitamin D. And so I asked him personally, I said, Dr. Heaney, why would they not accept your recommendations? He was recommending that everybody should get at least 2,000, but preferably 5,000 or more every day. And so why didn't they accept your recommendation? He says, well, there's 2 toxicologists on the committee who thought that vitamin D was a toxin. And that's coming back. That viewpoint is coming up. Just be aware. So when you read something in a paper that somebody died of vitamin D toxicity, number one, you'll know it's not true, okay, because it's never happened. Okay, even if you are taking too much, that's not going to be the main cause of death at all, ever. Okay, but it's basically discouraging something that really dramatically optimizes the immune system. Okay, so you want to keep your blood levels of vitamin D above 50. Okay, and at minimum, but preferably between 70 and 100. And that's my view and the view of many other doctors in the functional medicine realm. Okay, that's where you want to be. You want to be in the upper third of reference, not in the lower fifth of reference, like what is oftentimes being promoted. Okay, so vitamin D is a game changer. And let's cut right to that. In 2022, there was a major study published that was a meta-analysis. This is where they take all the studies that have been well-done studies to date, they combine them for statistical power, and then they determine what the actual outcome is depending on your level of vitamin D compared to getting a bad infection or hospitalization or death. And what they discovered is that because they had a huge amount of data, they found that individuals, if they had their blood levels of vitamin D just above 50 nanograms per deciliter, per milliliter rather, okay, which is the way vitamin D is measured on a blood test, that their risk of dying of COVID, even if they had the Delta variant during the height of the deaths from COVID, even if they had severe obesity, diabetes, pulmonary problems, etc., even if they had all these comorbidities, if their vitamin D was above 50, their risk of dying of COVID was near zero. Okay? So it's important for you and I to understand the mitigating factors. Yes, we want to work on the obesity. Yes, we want to work on the diabetes. Yes, we want to work on improving metabolism and eating right and exercise and sunlight and plenty of water, etc. Yes, we want to do all those things. Okay? But we also want to take advantage of the very simple remedies, and vitamin D is one of them. And by the way, don't assume because you spend time outside that you have plenty of vitamin D. I used to assume that. I was walking on the beach in Guam every afternoon in my bathing suit because I did a lot of lecturing at night, because I spent 14 years on Guam. Like Southern California, the sun shines every day. Okay? More intense in Guam than here. And so I thought my vitamin D was going to be awesome. It was 24. Okay? So don't expect being out in the sun, even if you're in the sun a lot, that you're going to have an adequate vitamin D level. Most of my patients, Southern California, Guam, in fact, I would say 90% have deficiencies of vitamin D. So if you're not supplementing vitamin D, you're probably deficient, is my point. And most people are going to need about 5,000. How do you know? Check. And don't use the excuse that your doctor won't measure it, because now they're being told not to measure it. Okay? So don't use the excuse that my insurance won't pay for it, because many insurances won't pay for it. Okay? What you do is you just order it yourself. You can go to altalabtest.com on your computer and order any test you want on your own. There's no excuses for not having medical tests done, especially something vitamin D, which is so inexpensive. So, altalabtest.com. It'll come up here in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this. The bottom line, there's a lot of misinformation about vitamin D, like I said. Here's a big newspaper article, magazine article in March of 2024. Man dies after consuming too much vitamin D as experts warn of risk. Cascade of problems. Wow. I want to hire that person to promote my practice. Okay, because they really raised the issue, but it's completely not true. Completely not true. And if we had 2 hours, I would explain everything. But we don't have time to explain it. So bottom line, in toxicology, we have what's called the lethal dose of 50. That's where 50% of the animals or whoever's being studied would die if they got that dose. Okay, so the LD50 for vitamin D is 16.8 milligrams per pound. That comes out to 100,909,091 units at one time. That would require you to consume 200 bottles of 90 capsules each. They have 5,000 units per capsule in one sitting. Of course, that's for the LD50. Now, I always check vitamin D, and I don't want the vitamin D to be too much above 100 nanograms per ml. Okay, because it's not necessary. I'm not aware of any studies that say anything more than 100 is a benefit. But more importantly, you don't want to be low. I don't care if you're a little high once in a while. You just don't want to be low. Okay, and the bottom line is that if you're taking vitamin D, and even if you're not taking vitamin D, you should probably take vitamin K2. If you're getting older, if you have any history of any cardiovascular issues, it's vitamin K2, MK7 that actually removes calcium from your arteries and puts it back in your bones. So anytime you take vitamin D, also take vitamin K2, 100 to 180 micrograms per day, and then a little bit of vitamin A along with it. Okay, now, what are lessons learned on vitamin D? Buy only high-quality supplements, because the only people in the medical literature that were found to have excessively high levels of vitamin D were because they were literally getting 1 million units a day for 7 months. In other words, the supplement was improperly manufactured. Okay, so make sure you're using a good quality manufacturer. Okay, test your levels twice a year. Spring, that's your lowest level of vitamin D based on sun exposure, and then in the fall, that's your highest level of vitamin D based on sun exposure. So once you've done that a couple times, you will know what the appropriate dose is for you. It's always individualized. And there's the ultralabtest.com. Okay, so don't overreact when you see articles, and you're going to be seeing more of those articles, I guarantee you. I've been watching them now for 20 years. You've been coming in little by little for 20 years. So somebody doesn't want you to have a good level of vitamin D. And I'll leave that at that. Okay, so, all right, so iodine. Okay, so real quickly on iodine. When I started researching very aggressively back in January of 2020, what are we going to do for this? How are we going to help our patients? There was no research on what worked, and there was apparently no interest in any research on what worked because it was all one-sided, right? We all know that. And so I started looking into this, and what I learned, I'd been using iodine in my clinical practice since the mid-90s when I learned that iodine was one of the best antifungals, antibacterials, and antivirals. So any of my patients who had chronic sinus conditions or postnasal drip, like my father, he had a long history of constantly clearing his throat. And so I got him on some iodine, sprayed up into his nostrils multiple times a day, and after about 3-4 weeks, that was completely cleared up. Okay, it doesn't work in every case because there's other causes of that. Okay, but that I've been using it for that and for any antiviral, antibacterial purposes. So of course, any health professional knows that the red iodine, the betadine, or the povidone iodine is used for if you have a cut or or an infection, they put that on topically. You don't drink povidone iodine. Where all the other iodines you can drink or you can ingest. Povidone is for external purposes only, or for swish and gargle as well. So I had read this book by Dr. David Derry, an MD PhD researcher, who actually had written also a book on one of the most powerful ways to limit risk of breast cancer. And he brought up iodine as the main way. I go like, really? Okay, so I started understanding the mechanism of action. And so Dr. David Derry, he published in 2009 a comprehensive review on iodine, the forgotten weapon against influenza virus. And here's the bottom line. They discovered that after the Spanish flu, do you think the government was interested in preventing another Spanish flu? Yes, apparently they were. So they earmarked a lot of money to researchers and universities all around the country to try to figure out, what do we do if this happens again? You know, after 25 years of research, the number one recommendation they came up with was iodine. Aerosolized iodine, you can use it in all kinds of different ways. Iodine sprayed up into the sinuses, iodine sprayed in the throat, nebulized iodine. That was the number one strategy. Why? Because it's literally, from a research standpoint, the most effective antiviral ever studied. It'll kill Ebola. It'll kill HIV. It'll kill Marburg virus. It'll kill any virus if it contacts it. I have a whole hour presentation that's on rumble.com. There it is. Okay. Last April, I did a series for Daniel Vieira, his Health and Healing Crusade. He has a program in Hawaii where people come out and get in, learn how to take care of their health and improve their health in many ways. And so he asked me to do like 3 or 4 presentations, and I put this together: the rise of immune deficiency, diabetes, dementia, blood clots, and autoimmunity after COVID infections and after COVID vaccines. And once I put it together, I had so much material, and I said, Danny, I don't know how to break this down to make it any shorter. And he said, well, let's just film it all. So we filmed for 7 hours straight. One Friday, we just filmed straight for 7 hours. That's the program that's on Rumble. If you just go to rumble.com, type in my name, you'll see it in his website, in his channel on Rumble. The last session, session 7, is all on iodine, with all the studies. This isn't me coming up with a theory that iodine is good. This has been studied more than any other antiviral, okay? And there was doctors that were fact-checking this information, saying it was wrong because iodine is an antibacterial, not an antiviral, they were saying. They could have checked Google for 30 seconds and seen they were wrong about that. Iodine is the best antiviral ever that's available. So, all right. So basically, there's different forms of iodine. And so I'm just going to refer you to that study or to that other presentation on this. And I'm going to just say 2 things about this. See the povidone iodine here? That's the betadine. You can get the generic, which is povidone 10%. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I actually bought a whole case of it. 12 of these bottles of povidone iodine. I didn't even get through 1 bottle. That's how concentrated this is, okay? And I actually gave one bottle away, and I still have the other 10. Okay, so you don't have to buy a whole case like I did, but you should at least have 1 bottle in every home of povidone iodine. This is really powerful. This is a game changer with any infection, topical or internal. Okay, now in this case, you don't want to drink or swallow povidone. Okay, or betadine. And so what you do, they call it the sniff and swish and gargle method. So you dilute this to either 1% or 0.5% iodine. And so basically, there's a whole formula here that you can watch on YouTube later, and if you want to get a copy of it, you can do a screen cut and get all this information on YouTube later if you want. So if you do a quarter teaspoon of this 10% povidone iodine in an ounce of water, that now is 1%. Is a 0.5% iodine. 0.5% works just as good as 1%, by the way. I'm going to show you a study here in a second. So what the researchers did in this study is that this was in early 2021. If everybody had been made aware of this study that was done in early 2021, it would have saved millions of lives around the world. And yet it was treated as quackery by the media. Okay, and okay, so bottom line is you do a swish and gargle. Okay, you do swish and gargle for 30 seconds. 30-second swish, gargle for 30 seconds, spit it out. If you're sick, you do that 4 times a day. And then you also use a little snoot cap, a little vertical spray cap, and spray the diluted version, not the concentrated version, spray it into your sinuses. Now that's going to burn or sting a little bit. You can do water and it'll burn or sting a little bit. So anything you squirt up into your nose is going to sting a little bit. So be aware of that. Okay, so we have that. Now, okay, so that here, let me just show you the study. Okay, so if you just, by the way, if you do that for 3 days, I've had many people say, hey, I got to fly internationally in 3 days and I got to have a COVID test. What do I do? And I have symptoms. I said, just do this for 3 days and you'll test negative. Why? Because there's no virus left. That's why you test negative. Okay, so, and that's been true in every case that I've noticed. So, bottom line is, here's a study that was published in January of 2021. And say within 3 days, the majority of patients, okay, basically like 85% of the patients now no longer tested positive. Whereas all the ones that did not get the iodine still tested positive. So this is 300 patients in each arm of the study. Okay, after 5 days, an even more dramatic drop in testing positive, and after 7 days, just a huge drop in testing positive. Now, more importantly is what happened to hospitalization risk. So the risk of being hospitalized without the need for oxygen, okay, dropped by 7-fold if you were doing the iodine. 7-fold. Okay, the risk of being hospitalized and requiring oxygen, okay, dropped by over 6-fold. Okay, and the risk of dying from COVID in those who did the iodine treatment, just like we said, dropped by over 8-fold. 800% drop, decreased risk. Okay, so that was a major game changer, and unfortunately it didn't really get picked up. There's no public health agency that promoted this. We were promoting it here from the very beginning, even before the study was done. We were promoting this in early 2020 without this study because we knew it would come out as a positive or a good thing. Okay, so you can use it as a snoot cap, you can do it as a spray, okay, or you can nebulize it. You don't want to nebulize povidone, you want to nebulize the other forms of iodine, and there's information on that. Okay, so let me end by talking a little bit about charcoal. I already mentioned the 11-year-old who ended up becoming a type 1 diabetic because of getting COVID from her mother, and the only symptom she had was diarrhea. If they had known this strategy, for just as soon as she had the diarrhea or as soon as she had any symptoms, start taking charcoal. That could have possibly mitigated her risk of getting full-blown type 1 diabetes, and she would not need insulin. That's a speculation on my part, but that's what I would expect based on the data. Do you know in Asia, the way they test for somebody who has COVID or not is they use rectal swabs. Why? Because the majority of the virus ends up in the colon and comes out in the stool. So that's where the virus is. The body's trying to get rid of it, and so it can actually spread. It's causing damage to that entire GI system. And so So charcoal is really, really, really critical. Well, at some point we're going to have a whole session just on the use of charcoal. It's amazing. As I said, of all the things in my armamentarium, the number one thing that I wouldn't leave home without would be charcoal. That's how important this is. Okay, so you can use it for all kinds of things. My children would go on many mission trips around the world. They would always take a big bottle of activated charcoal, and they were always one of the only ones that didn't get sick on the trip. And they were the nurse for all their classmates that were, throwing up or having GI problems, and they'd finally consent to taking the black shake to get better. Okay, so let me actually check something real quick. I want to. Okay, I wanted to just go to my slides. I don't know, it just went dead. Maybe that's a good way to stop, huh? Okay, so I think we've gone long enough here. But we could go forever. There's so much good information. Let me just mention one other thing. I talked about Asheville and the problem with mold and the problem with disease and GI diseases going rampant potentially. If we had a major earthquake here in Southern California, we would lose electricity, we'd lose water very quickly. Okay, and GI diseases would just fly through the community. Don't even try to call 911. Don't try to go to the hospital, because there's nobody's going to be able to help you with that. Especially if you have a GI issue, they don't want you around, right? Okay, so the only real answer: have charcoal on hand, and if you do that, you're probably going to be okay. Just that alone. Okay, so word to the wise. Jesus would say, "He that has an ear, let him hear." Okay, get charcoal. Get it anywhere. Get the capsules. Get a couple of bottles of the capsules, and get some of the big bottles of the powder. Okay, they last a long time. I have enough charcoal at my house to take care of my whole neighborhood. Okay, if I have to, I will. Okay, so just know that mold and mildew is a major toxic influence on the body. I do all kinds of testing on my patients for gene expression studies that measure whether you're super susceptible to mold and other biologic toxins, to urine testing, to home testing to see if they have an exposure to mold. Because if there is a problem with mold, your cognitive function is not going to get better. Your cardiovascular issues are being impacted. Your immune system is being negatively impacted. Your risk of cancer is going up. Mold is a major issue, and most people have no clue that this is a problem. I just talked to a patient Thursday. They live in Ohio, and they said that they just did tests on their home, and their home mold count, which is in the dust, was 3.5 times the upper limit of acceptable. Okay, and we're working on all kinds of health issues they have, and they couldn't even tell they had a mold problem at home. But when they went to their church, they would spend 30 minutes in the church and they had to leave. There's 6 couples at that church who can't go to that church anymore because there's so much mold toxin in the air. You don't have to see mold for it to be a problem. Mold toxins or mycotoxins are in the air. These are the micro particles from dried up mold spores. Okay, so just be aware. We'll talk more about that some other day. And then the last thing I want to say here, relative to having simple remedies available, are what I call SAFRAX. Okay, so I have no financial interest in chlorine dioxide or SAFRAX, none at all. Okay, my only interest is you knowing about it. That's my only interest. Why? I have a whole box of it at home. I'm ready. I use it for all kinds of things at home. It's the best external disinfectant you could ever buy. It's better than any industrial strength disinfectant at a hospital or other corporation. It's the best. When hospitals have a hot spot that they can't treat, they go to chlorine dioxide. Okay, so get some of this. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to safrax.com and get it there. Just get some on your own. And then, bottom line, Am I not on? There we go. Okay, there we go. So here's were you seeing this earlier? Okay, sorry. So this is Safrax, SAFRAX.com. And so there's, again, just get some of it. Now, there's all kinds of data sheets on their website that you can download showing you how to improve your house situation, how to demold a car, how to use it as a disinfectant on hard surfaces, how you can use it as an off-gassing agent to permeate your house and upholstery, and all the precautions that you need to take to do that right. So bottom line is that if you take one or more of these little tablets in water, it becomes one of the best, actually probably the best disinfectant you could ever have. It's like 10 times more effective than Clorox, and it's safe. It doesn't have the downside of Clorox or regular strong chlorine. It is not chlorine, it's chlorine dioxide, completely different molecule. So 100 parts per million, which one tablet and 32 ounces will get you an antibacterial. And then, let me see here. And then 5 tablets in that will give you an antiviral, and 10 to 20 tablets will give you an anti-mold. In other words, mold is far more dangerous than these other things. In the long run, mold, it can be a really bad thing for it. That's why we want to address it properly. All right, let me recommend. Okay, and then we're almost done here. So when we're managing spike protein pathology, to kind of summarize broader issues, we want to effectively reverse or optimize diabetes, prediabetes. We want to optimize blood sugars, weight, avoid fast foods, avoid processed grains, intermittent fasting, exercising appropriately after meals and at other times, stress management, rest for restoration, sauna detox, hydrotherapy. These are all strategies to help you detoxify, and it's been shown to help with spike protein pathology. There's all kinds of studies and reports. Dr. Peter McCullough, who has done a lot of work, literally one of the world's most published cardiologists, who has taken on this challenge to figure out what works. And so he has clinical rationale for how to detoxify spike protein. Great presentations and articles. Bromelain, nattokinase, curcumin, very, very helpful. Okay, and so real quick, last couple slides. So if you're treating for preventing problems later on, make sure you're on a good probiotic. One of the problems with having COVID, the infection, or getting the vaccine is that they both destroy and annihilate bifidobacteria, which is one of the most important immunosupportive probiotics in the gut. Without bifidobacteria, you really can't have a healthy microbiome. And so if you've had any issues with those two, make sure that you're reinoculating bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. And there's a lot of products that have both of those in it. Just pay attention to bifidobacteria and lactobacillus. Then prebiotics, which can be done with certain food sources or certain key herbs that are prebiotics, are basically food for the probiotic. One of my favorite powders is called IAG, or arabinogalactan. That's a powerful immune enhancer in the gut, via the gut. Vitamin D, we already talked about. Zinc and quercetin. Quercetin is the ionophore that complexes zinc and transports it into the cell so it can block viral replication. So bottom line is, zinc is not going to help you a lot unless you have some quercetin or something like that. In fact, they have learned that that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin have a similar benefit as the quercetin. The quercetin's the natural option. Okay, so N-acetylcysteine, curcumin, and vitamin C. So those are some of those strategies. Okay, now what about early treatment? Okay, if you're starting to have experienced symptoms, in addition to the fundamental strategies that we learned from the Spanish flu encounter, then you want to, on the first day of symptoms, optimize your vitamin D. Especially if you haven't already been taking vitamin D. It takes about a week for your body to process that vitamin D into the active antimicrobial, antiviral form. So that's why you want to have vitamin D on hand already. And not having it on hand already sets you up for risks that you don't want to have. But you can go up to 50,000 or more units a day for that week or so, just to optimize. You remember, when you're sick, your body's using up vitamin D very rapidly. So you need more. You need more of it. Nattokinase, 100 milligrams twice daily on an empty stomach or an hour before eating. That will actually chew up blood clots. It'll chew up spike protein. There's documentation of it. So will N-acetylcysteine and bromelain. There's studies that document all the way from 2021 that taking those will actually destroy spike protein in your body, regardless of how it got there. Okay, and so forth. So those are some key strategies. Okay, so I think, so let me just quickly go through these last slides. This is the study that was done by a group of oncologists that were studying bromelain and N-acetylcysteine to fight cancer, and they discovered that it actually destroyed spike protein too, so they published this study. It's very well done. Okay, other studies that show a nattokinase, an enzyme that Japanese eat it like candy from natto, the natto bean, that's full of nattokinase, and that's one reason that they did better on this. That nattokinase is very good for getting rid of. So today we've explored a lot of information about what we call the exposome. Everything that we are exposed to, everything in our environment, everything that we do, everything that we eat, everything that we drink, everything that we think, everything that we say impacts our immune system. We need to understand that context. So there's so many things involved. We want to take advantage of as many of them as possible. And here's the last slide. The last slide. One of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis, where he says, you can't go back and change the beginning. Many of us are thinking, man, if I just known this, if I had just known this in the beginning, things would be very different. Okay, but that's something we can't change. That's water that's gone under the bridge. So you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are, and you can change the ending. And with that, I'm going to say a word of prayer that God would bless you with this information. And for those of you that haven't had enough, I'll stay by for some group questions, okay? So let's pray. Father, I want to thank you for allowing us to understand this information. For, the book of nature, your second book, is so full of important information that we need to figure out, and we need to apply it properly. And I just pray, Lord, that you send your Spirit to be with each individual present here, everybody who's watching this online, that they were asked the question, what is it that I can do now to change my future? What is it that I can do now that gives me now hope for the future? And so we ask for your blessing physically, emotionally, and spiritually today. We thank you in advance. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I don't know if we have a mic for a roving mic. Is there a mic anywhere? Alex is bringing one down. By the way, let me just say, this has been 2 hours, okay? So many of you just need to go home, right? I get that. Some of you are stubborn, they're going to stay, okay? So don't hesitate to leave now or take a break and come back if you want to ask some questions, get some water, use the restroom, whatever. So I realize it's been a long day for many of you, and many of you have dogs at home that are waiting to get outside too. But I'm going to stay by, for at least half an hour if you want me to, and take your questions. Now, I'm not going to stay by long term to take individual questions, because I could be here all day, and I haven't had lunch yet. Okay, but I will take your group questions now. And so who has the mic? Okay, so don't look at me for your question. Look at whoever's got the mic, or pass it around. So you're on first. Go ahead.
Hi, brother.
Go ahead, speak closer.
So I studied a lot with, not under, but I was reading a lot of Dr. Tenpenny's work. Are
Yes.
you familiar?
Yes.
So I was doing the iodine, and I kind of stopped, but I think I might just go back to that. But the vitamin D, so I took her advice, or that group of doctors.
Yes.
And my last level at the VA was 147. Now, she said up to 200 is safe.
You're talking about your blood levels now.
Blood levels,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
If you go over 200, you risk, or get near 200, you risk your calcium, issues with raising calcium, which could affect your heart possibly. But so I dropped back, and I'm 87 now. But I just wanted to mention to everybody in here that not all vitamin D is the same. Most of what you're taking is sheep wool, basically. So I use Naturello, Naturelo. It's on Amazon. You want the 180 tablets, and they're 5,000 each. So I take 2 of them, and I was taking them 3 times a week, but that's what gave me the 147.
Yeah.
So I've taken them once or twice a week now, and I've dropped back to 87. So it works really well.
Okay, so let me comment. I thank you for that statement and question. I'm glad, number one, that you are paying attention to the vitamin D issue. And many doctors would say, "Whoa, you're taking way too much." Now, this is my guideline. When I check patients' vitamin D and their blood levels above 100, I don't freak them out and say, "Oh my goodness, this is way too high. You're gonna have this and this problem." I actually talked to Dr. Robert Heaney, prior to his death a couple years ago. He was an elderly man at the time, and he said there's no study that's ever been done that shows if your blood level's below 250 that there's a toxicity problem. Okay? Now, that's based on the statistical research. That doesn't mean that you or I or some person might have a greater potential problem with a level at 130 or 140, And so, number one, I'm not aware of any benefit of being above 100, and so don't be above 100. There's no reason to be above 100. But the problem is most people are under 30 or even under 20. Okay, and so that's the worst possible scenario, is being low. That's the most likely scenario, is being low. So make sure you're taking it up. But then, like you did, you checked and you go like, "Whoa, okay, I'm actually a little high," and so which is unusual for how much you were taking. I take 10,000 every day, and I'm at 85 consistently. So if you were doing what I was doing, you would be like 50 or higher. Okay, so that's why it's individualized. We call it personalized medicine. Don't do it because somebody else is doing it. Do it based on your own testing, which means get tested. Pay for it and order it yourself if you have to. Okay, so that's the bottom line. Now, as I said before, vitamin D needs to be coupled with vitamin K2, MK7, at least at 100 micrograms a day. I take a supplement that has vitamin D3 plus vitamin K2 at 180 micrograms per 5,000. So I take 2 of those a day. So I take over 300 micrograms of K2, MK7 every day, which is a little bit more than most people need. Okay, but I have a family history of coronary calcification, and so I'm just doing that from a caution standpoint, and I have a major genetic risk factor for blood clotting. So vitamin K is actually immunoenhancing as well, okay, as well as this type of vitamin K helps regulate blood clotting properly. So those are some of the nuances with vitamin D. Now, who's next? Yes. Yeah. Oh.
I was wondering if you could let us know what is the proper ratio if you want to do the charcoal shake. You know, like if there's like some really bad stomach issue and you want to do the charcoal shake.
Yes.
You mentioned it, but there was no ratios. So can you give
Okay,
us
with
the
charcoal, there's really no ratio like there is with iodine because you don't want to get too concentrated. The main issue with charcoal is you got to have it thin enough to get it down. So it's more of a preference, you know, and the main issue with charcoal is just getting enough of it so that it has the impact that you want. And fortunately, for instance, I did all the toxin testing on myself years ago, and I discovered that I had a genetic expression that made me super mold susceptible. Who knew, right? I had no idea that this was a problem I had, which makes me more likely to get cancer, immune suppression, more likely to get sick. And so I tested my mold urinary levels, and they were sky high. My mold toxin level was sky high. And my home was clean, so it wasn't from my home. It was from my past experience in a humid environment on Guam where I got all my mold. Okay, so I'd been away from it for 15 years, and it was still in my body causing immunosuppression. Okay, so I take a little bit of charcoal, 2 capsules every night at bedtime, away from everything else, so that I detox at night with charcoal. And there's some other ways to detox as well. So that's a simple thing to do. But you could also do a teaspoon of powdered charcoal if you prefer, but that can get messy if you do it every night. I do it indefinitely. I do it like 5 nights a week, you know, and I take a week off every couple months. Why? Because I need to get rid of the toxins gradually. My body holds on to toxins, okay? And a lot of my patients have the same problem, okay? And that's why they're my patients, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't need to see me. So now the other thing, if you have gastroenteritis or you have, you know, a stomach flu or diarrhea for any reason or any kind of food poisoning, you want to just do like a heaping teaspoon or more of the powdered charcoal. Put it over the sink, because once you move that teaspoon, it'll just, it's a very, you know, the surface on that is just disperses very easily. No surface tension on that charcoal. So you got to make sure you can make a mess really easily. So put it in, I put it in warm water, so it mixes, it dissolves quickly, and then I add an ice cube, make it chilled, and drink it down. Warm charcoal water is not very tasty, okay? Cold charcoal water is okay. It kind of tastes minty going down. But it's a lifesaver in many ways, literally, to have available. And I use it anytime there's any question of GI, boom. Okay, and many doctors out of Europe and other places are now saying that the new COVID variants, for instance, have a GI component. Not always, but many times it's subtle. And remember, the virus is in the gut, no matter if you have symptoms or not. So take charcoal as a way to get rid of that. See, one of the problems with these viruses is they become a bacterial phage, meaning that they infect the viruses from COVID and others, infect the viruses in the gut, like the, you know, we all have E. coli and other bacteria that are technically bad, but they're in the right ratio so they're not really a problem. But they can get infected by the viruses, and now the immune system can't get to them, and they live forever. And they release toxins every day, 24 hours a day. And so that's one reason people feel bad all the time, whereas they didn't used to feel bad. So charcoal will absorb that and get rid of that, but you still need to have some type of natural antibacterial to get rid of those viral laced bacteria. So there's a whole clinical aspect to that. So that's how I use charcoal.
Oh, thanks. So you can't OD on it. It's fine to take daily and whatever, right?
Yeah, you don't, no, just basically, I always use about 4 or 5 ounces of water so that it's thin enough. So that's why I call it the black shake. It's more like a black juice. It's not that thick, and you just drink it down real quick. My daughter, My daughters were both got the stomach flu. We were on Guam at the time. I'd come back from doing a lecture one night, and my wife said, the girls got the stomach flu. And they were standing in the back just looking at me like, what was I going to do? You know, they're all like peaked and just not feeling good. You know, they're like 5 and 7. And so I said, oh, no problem. I'll make you the black shake. And I made the mistake of letting my older daughter, Maddie, watch me make it. And she said, oh, Daddy, that doesn't look very good. And then instantly I knew what I needed to do. I said, oh, honey, this isn't for you. It's for me. I don't want to get what you have. And I just drank it all and walked off. She went, well, what about me? And so I said, well, you want me to make you one too? She says, yeah. So I made her one, and you just put it, for kids, you just put it in a colored sippy cup and use a colored straw so they can't see the black. Because, most people don't like to drink something that's black, right? Yeah, so, whoever, if you can pass the mic to the next person, or whoever wants it next, just grab it. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, Wes, when you talked about iodine before, I thought there were two kinds. Lugols, 2%? I thought.
Yeah, I kind of went over that quick.
I thought that's the one you should drink.
So here's
a couple of drops, and then there was another one you sprayed in your nose. That was clear.
Yeah, so there's actually multiple. So if you go to my 7th lecture on Rumble, that's all on iodine. It has all the studies. We go over much more than I had a chance to go over today. So if you don't believe me yet, go to that. You'll see study after study after study. It kills any virus. There's no virus that iodine can't kill if it gets in contact with it, but it has to contact it. So that's why the key with respiratory illnesses, whether they're sinus-related or lung-related, is that the virus usually hangs out in your throat or your sinuses for at least 3 days before it infects your lungs, before they can get into your body and cause all the problems. So that's why the first idea that you might have been exposed, what you do is you immediately do the iodine spray into the sinus. You can do the diluted povidone and just follow that protocol, or you can do what I call the liquid iodine forte, which is actually potassium iodide. That's a really good solvent, and then you can put a spray snoot cap, a vertical spray cap on it, and just do 2 or 3 sprays each nostril, and it'll kill any virus in that area. And so if you do that early enough, you've resolved the problem before it becomes a real problem. It's kind of like, it's like killing a mosquito before it actually tries to take blood off your arm. You just got it before it did anything to you. Okay, so that's the first strategy. Now there's the next strategy is using the nebulizer, and do this. You want to have 2 nebulizers at every home. One that's portable, battery-operated nebulizer. They can go $50 to $200. But the portable ones have a mesh. Have a mesh that the iodine has to go through to be automatized and turned into this electrostatic spray, which is very, very fine mist. The problem with that, if you use Lugols, which is a good iodine, but it's really sticky, or if you use nascent iodine, which is not as sticky but still sticky, it'll go right down to the mesh and gum it up. And then it won't work very well until you clean it and clean it and clean it and clean it. So that's why you want to always have a mechanical tabletop nebulizer that also nebulizes very finely, but it's a different type of nebulizer that won't get gummed up by the Lugols, etc. And then you can, as long as you dilute the Lugols, like a drop of the Lugols will go a long way, or 5 to 10 drops of the nascent iodine with some of the liquid iodine forte, mixed up first, then added to the nebulizer cap. That'll nebulize very nicely, even in a portable. So here's the bottom line. If you use iodine at first exposure or first symptom of any viral illness, you'll probably knock it out within a couple days or less. You can knock it out in 1 day. Okay? If you wait 5 days before you do anything about it, then it's going to be much harder because it's already now gone systemic. It's still going to be good for you. You still want to do it, but the earlier the better. Now, next. Well, so let me actually go to that real quick. So there's different types of iodine, as I pointed out here. Okay, so here are the 5 types. The first type is the liquid iodine forte that I use clinically, and you can put a snoot cap on it. And I have one in my office, I have one in my Jeep, I have one in my home, basically almost every room of the home. Every time we travel, I have one in my backpack. My wife has one in her backpack. And as soon as we get on the plane, spray it in my lungs, and I'm good. Okay, and at the end of the flight, we do the same thing again. And even if we get exposed, so what? The virus is dead. Right, so then there's the number 3 here is the nascent iodine. Nascent iodine. That's pure iodine. It's that you can mix with the first one if you want. That's what I normally do for nebulizing. Okay, and then the 4th one is the Lugols. That's 2% iodine. It's a combination of potassium iodide and iodine, which gives you the best of both worlds. By the way, everybody should have this stockpiled in their home anyways. If there's ever a nuclear accident or on purpose, right, you want to have plenty of iodine because that'll limit one form of radiation poisoning, which is the iodine 131, I believe, toxicity. If you have plenty of iodine in your system, your thyroid will not be damaged by that radioactive iodine, because you already have all the iodine you need in your thyroid. Okay, but if you're low on thyroid, it'll suck up all that radioactive iodine, and now you're going to have cancer. Okay, so everybody should have iodine anyways. Okay, but we should have it for multiple reasons. Okay, so all right, next question. Yes.
You mentioned bromelain in connection with curcumin. I saw that in one of the slides. I'm not sure if fighting toxins and things like that. Just wanted to ask if you could shortly elaborate on that a little bit.
I'm trying to see for the...
Yeah, it was towards the end, and you said...
Next one, yeah. So here's the thing. So clinically, curcumin is one of the best anti-inflammatories available in nature. I mean, there's many, but that's one of the ones I automatically recommend. Somebody comes to me and says, I have joint pain, I have inflammation, any kind of inflammation. Boom, I put them on curcumin. Curcumin is really good for the brain. It's really good for the heart. It's really good for the immune system. So again, anything that lowers inflammation is if you have it, is good for everything, right? So I recommend, Dr. Peter McCullough recommends 500 milligrams of curcumin once a day as part of his protocol for spike protein detox. And he's a very brilliant man. He's published more studies than I think any other cardiologist in the world. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. And so the fact that he's publishing studies on curcumin is amazing to me. Okay, so but if somebody has serious like autoimmune disease or inflammatory disease, then doing more of that, doing two twice a day is better.
And bromelain I saw in connection with curcumin, is that?
Yeah, so Dr. Peter McCullough says for bromelain, do 500 milligrams once a day, and nattokinase 100 milligrams twice a day. Both of those need to be empty stomach.
And it's an enhancer when you already take curcumin? Did I understand that correctly?
Everybody's got to find their own balance, right? So it just depends on your situation and what you need, right? So some people need a lot because they have an autoimmune disease or they have, some precancerous issue or cancer. They need a lot more anti-inflammatories. Or if somebody, like I had a patient recently who was just diagnosed with a major autoimmune disease, and she was on prednisone and wanted to get off her prednisone. Says, well, you got to start so I gave her like 2 twice a day, to get her on a full dose right away, a bigger dose right away. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
we have. By the way, is there somebody else that can move the mic around? Because we have people in the front. You're never going to get the mic because it's in the back.
I'll move it for you.
All right, Bill.
Yeah, excuse me. Alex Jones InfoWars store sells X2 pure iodine from crystals in Utah with a stopper, and he says it's to fortify your thyroid gland. And my question is that okay to take a pure iodine like that?
I'm not sure I caught the whole full question, Bill.
Well, there's a thing called X2 that's sold by Alex Jones at InfoWars stores. He says it's good for you to fortify your thyroid gland in your throat, which helps your body out. And I think there's some question of whether you could take a pure iodine like that into your system. He has a stopper on the bottle.
Well, there's two main forms of iodine. There's the potassium iodide, which is the only source in the liquid iodine forte. And then there's nascent iodine, which is iodine. And then there's Lugol's, which has both. And then you have so there's different forms of iodine. And ideally, you want to have a combination somehow of both. Yes, to get the best effects for cancer. Okay. So, all right, will you bring it up to her after you're done? Okay, yes.
A person that has thyroid cancer, iodine out of the question for them?
Okay, so this actually brings up an interesting point that was actually discussed in the study that I shared with you that was published in early 2021. In the medical literature, this has been well known for a long time, that if you take a lot of iodine internally, that it can make your thyroid stimulating hormone go up, which makes it look like you are deficient in thyroid, but actually you're not. Because when they measure the thyroid hormone, they don't change at all. See, TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, is not a thyroid hormone. It's a thyroid stimulating hormone that comes from the pituitary gland, and that goes up for reasons that we don't fully understand, but usually that means that the pituitary wants to make more thyroid. It increases. So if anything, we interpret a high TSH as low thyroid, but in this case, the pituitary wants more thyroid. So it's almost like the pituitary is saying, hey, let's take advantage of the iodine, make a little bit more thyroid to have more anti-cancer effect. Because remember, thyroid function is anti-carcinogenic. Okay, that's why many systems that are looking at preventing or treating cancer are optimized thyroid. We know in Alzheimer's, you can't even diagnose Alzheimer's unless you first prove it's not a thyroid deficiency. Because you can have all the symptoms of Alzheimer's just because your thyroid is low. So the studies show, and I've done this myself, during the pandemic, when I read that study by Dr. David Derry, and I was taking 50 milligrams of iodine for like a year and a half, just to have my blood levels really high, and my TSH went up to 7, which means that I have full-blown hypothyroidism. But I didn't. My thyroid hormones were exactly the same. Okay? So again, we don't fully understand that, and I only did that for a time, and it was more of a research project on myself, especially since we didn't know exactly what was going on with COVID at the time. But that's one of the arguments of the early papers, is that if you don't know, optimize iodine in your system. And so the other issue with iodine is that, and even many functional medicine doctors are concerned about if somebody has an autoimmune process. Like most thyroid problems are autoimmune in nature. They're called Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroiditis. And that means the thyroid is being attacked by the immune system. Okay, and so when you add iodine to that, you can end up with more autoimmunity, more active autoimmunity. But here's my take on it. I believe that the reason for that is because iodine is a detoxicant. It's removing toxins from the body, and sometimes so rapidly that those toxins that are coming out of the organ systems so rapidly are now activating the immune system temporarily to be more autoimmune. Okay, so the answer is finding the right balance. I don't completely stay away from iodine and autoimmunity. I manage it. Okay, because iodine gets rid of mercury. It's antiviral. And anytime you start fighting that battle in the body, the immune system and the viruses and the bacteria don't like that. They want to be in control. And so they're going to act out a little bit. So that's my take. Yes?
Doctor, last year I heard that vitamin D is toxic, so I threw away all of the vitamin D.
You and millions of other people heard vitamin D was toxic.
Yeah, and I was
that's why I'm talking about it.
Thank you so much. May the Lord bless you. I have a question. A few weeks ago, the doctor told me after the last CT scan, that I'm facing kidney tumor. It's around 4 centimeters. And at the moment that I knew it, I stopped all of my supplements, like colloidal minerals, vitamin C, and
On what basis did you stop them?
because I was afraid, because of my kidney. I said, I have a tumor.
So it's not likely not related at all. If related at all, it's probably helping you. In general, I'm saying. Yeah. I understand why people stop things because they don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, but we have to reason from cause to effect. And generally speaking, if it's a supplement, a vitamin or mineral that's being taken rationally, it's going to help, not hurt, generally speaking. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
it's not going to hurt my tumor if I take 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C and colloidal minerals.
If anything, it should help your immune system.
Oh, okay. And also,
Again, I can't give clinical advice because I don't know your full situation, but I'm talking in generalities now.
Okay.
You're always better off being well-nourished, especially if you have a tumor, especially if that tumor might be cancerous if you don't know.
yeah, we don't know yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Okay?
you, doctor.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank
Well, any other questions?
Yeah, this is a question about the Holy Spirit. And when is God going to convict us of sins and lead us into all righteousness?
Okay. Well, bottom line is, when we talk about holistic health, Scott, we are looking at every aspect of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so the good news, and I'll have to just be general with my answer, the good news is that we are all promised the Holy Spirit to guide us, okay, to operate through our conscience, to give us wisdom as what to do next. And if we pray for guidance from the Holy Spirit, okay, God is going to intercede on our behalf and give us more wisdom so that we can make good decisions and determine what truth is. So spiritual things are spiritually discerned. Okay? And more these days, okay, almost everything is spiritually discerned. Yeah, where you have to really ask the question. That's what I was talking about. What is truth? How do you know you can trust somebody? Well, that's partly spiritually discerned, where the Holy Spirit can guide us in saying, is this true or is this a sham? Is this quackery? What is going to work for me? What is reasonable? And I think God is there to help guide us in those decisions. I think the gentleman in the back had a question as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question, Scott.
Back when the COVID epidemic was getting off the ground, there was a well-known entrepreneur, philanthropist who's tested vaccines in Africa and India.
Say that again, that last part.
He tested vaccines in Africa and India to ill effects on some of the citizens there. But anyway, I heard him on TV opine when they asked him what he
Can you speak directly into the mic, not to the side, but
when he
put
was
the
on
mic up
TV
too.
and they asked him what he thought the ideal world population would be, he said about 500 million.
Right.
Now, when I look at how they handled the COVID epidemic, it's obviously there's a lot of incompetence and profit motive for those who held interest in the patents on the vaccines. Do you see something more nefarious than that going on? I remember hearing Dr. McCulloch up at Berrien Springs speak about the darkness that was characteristic of what was going on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Great question, thank you. Dr. Peter McCulloch was considered to be one of the most trusted academics ever. He was the president of several medical societies. He founded the Cardiovascular Renal Medical Society. He was the chief editor of several medical journals. He was the associate chairman of internal medicine at Baylor University Medical School and hospital. So he was, the epitome of the academic, physician, researcher, published more than pretty much anybody else. And yet he was fired from his job. He lost all his credentials, his boards. He was vilified and censored and canceled in every which way possible. And he didn't seem to care. It's almost like he's accomplished so much in his life. It's like it doesn't matter if anybody ever thinks that I have credentials, because everybody knows already that I do. So in a way, he didn't have anything to lose, even though he lost all his positions. All he cared about was the truth. And he actually did the vaccine initially himself, and he promoted it to his patients, but then he realized that something was wrong. Why? Because he was paying attention to his own patients. He was a good doctor. He learned from his patients. And if we fail to learn from clinical medicine, from what's happening in front of our very eyes, then we're not very good at our job, or we're cowards, one of the two. Okay, and so when he talks about the nefarious aspects of what's going on in the world around us, he knows firsthand what's going on. Okay, so he's an amazing man that I followed him from the very beginning. I knew all the stuff before he did. Well, not all of it. I knew I practiced, natural functional medicine from the beginning. He was a conventional cardiologist, and he figured it out. Why can't everybody else figure it out? Okay, and so he verified what I already knew and took me way beyond, because he published it. He did the due diligence. So there's no question, that there's a great controversy afoot. In fact, I was part of an organization that gave Dr. McCullough a book called The Great Controversy. And if you've never read the book The Great Controversy by Ellen G. White, you're in for a real treat. And we told Dr. McCullough, read the first chapter. The first chapter of that book is the chapter describing what happened at the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, AD 70. And I mean, it's horrific. It's horrific what happened. What they did to each other before Rome came in was horrific. They were killing each other in droves. They were eating their babies. They were eating mules' heads. They were starving to death. They were being basically the Romans were just basically had them surrounded for years, right? And then you read what happened in that first chapter, and then discover that basically in the end of time, and we're pretty close to it right now, okay, it's going to be way worse than that was. Okay, so something bad is coming. We've gotten the glimpse of it with the mandates and the coercion and you can't work unless you do this and that. We've gotten the initial taste of it. It's going to be worse sometime in the future. I don't know when, but you could see where that could happen anytime with one bad thing happening to us. Okay, it could be a pandemic, it could be a cyber attack, it could be a nuclear threat. We've never had a worse nuclear threat in our lives, in the history of the world, more than now. Right? The Cuban Missile Crisis, nothing compared to what's going on right now. Okay? And so we're in for some really serious hard times. That's one of my motivations for saying, if you don't have them already, stock up on charcoal, iodine, and chlorine dioxide tablets. Okay, that'll solve a lot of problems Not every problem, obviously, but a lot of problems. You got to have your own medical kit because nobody else is going to come to our rescue if things get really bad, like what's happening in Asheville right now. You know, they say that they're helping them, but they're not. Okay, I know because I know people in Asheville. Okay, so it's going to be far worse than that. Okay, so the bottom line is yes, we're dealing with read Ephesians 6:12 to get an idea of the rulers of darkness and principalities that we're going to be dealing with, and we know who's ultimately in charge. So we told Dr. McCullough, read the first chapter of Great Controversy. In fact, Scott right there has a whole bunch of them. Probably right. Do we have any here? Yes. So if you want any here, there'll be a stack of them on the way out. You can get it. You can get almost free online. You can download it online. A Great Controversy by Ellen G. White. And then read the last 8 chapters. We told him to do that, and he went, "Whoa!" He started to understand the conspiracies that the world is bringing to us in a whole different light, and it would be a real eye-opener for all of us to pay attention, especially to those last 8 chapters in that book. So I don't know if I answered your question adequately. Was there a follow-up?
Probably about as well as you could on public
So
TV.
bottom line is yes, I've seen the same videos, you know, and there's no question. I watch a series that's called Vihan Health. There is a physician out of Europe, an internist, who's very, very sharp, very wise, and he's bringing in all experts from all over the world. And he basically said it flat out. He says, you know what? The bottom line is, he says, if you don't like to hear conspiracy theories, just go ahead and turn me off right now. But this is what he said, you know, and it's something that we should consider. He said, you know, we know what Kissinger said a long time ago. We know what Gates have said. We know what a lot of people, we know what the King of England used to say. They're all talking about depopulation, right? There's no question about that. That's not a theory. That just look it up, right? And so the reality is that, you know, people in power have always felt that there was too many of the undesirables, too many of the, in their mind, the deplorables, right? And so that's why there's talking about having less population on the planet. And, you know, you can understand from a selfish standpoint, they're making an interesting point, okay? But it's certainly not good for human rights, right? And so this doctor from Vihan Health, he's saying, you know, the reality is that all the Western countries, and maybe many of the other countries, they set up their retirement systems, expecting people to live for about 2-3 years after retirement, not 20-25 years after retirement. So there's no way that we can fund the debt that society has, the government has to retirees. There's no way that can be funded. So you connect the dots. You know, so, I mean, that's very nefarious. That's very evil. Okay, but, you know, give me a better answer to what's going on. Yeah. Right? Yeah, Scott, go ahead and take the mic.
Yeah, quick question. In case of a nuclear explosion, what would be the best way to take the iodine supplement? Or I have Lugol's, but how would you take that? So I'm operating from memory right now. What I would do is look it up. Okay, but basically you got to take a pretty hefty dose, and I'm guessing that it's close to a milligram body weight, a pound body weight per initially. Okay, so we're looking at 100 or more milligrams of iodine. Potassium iodide is the best source for that purpose, I believe. And so that's why you just have to have the tablets or the liquid available so that you can take it as you need it. When people are, once there's a nuclear event, forget about trying to get iodine. Nobody's going to give it to you, right? So you just need to have it on hand. And you take that internally? I mean...
Yeah, so the idea is that it goes systemic, and then the thyroid gland will absorb a whole bunch of it,
And so the thyroid gland will be saturated with iodine. So when the radioactive iodine comes through the air, it has nowhere to attach on the thyroid gland. Okay, I mean, there's still the cesium problem, which is a bigger problem, and there's other things. By the way, charcoal is one thing to do for cesium toxicity. I remember this is in the mid-'90s. I was seeing a patient, a Japanese lady, who actually had been at Hiroshima. She had been exposed to the atom bomb in Hiroshima. Her whole family had been exposed. And so she was seeing me as a patient, so I was very interested, of course, in what she did. And her father was a Chinese herbal doctor in Japan, and he had all these things available, all these different tinctures and herbs available, and immediately gave it to the family. None of them got any serious radiation poisoning, whereas many other people who were even further away than they were died from the radiation poisoning. So she was part of a study because of that. So that's why early intervention, if we learned anything from COVID, okay, the biggest mistake by far was the lack of early intervention. And basically the entire public health system, the entire medical system should be ashamed of themselves for not doing early intervention. If they had just done early intervention like they did for any other infection, it would have solved the majority of the problem. But to tell people to go home and basically eat whatever you want and just hang out and drink beers and then go to the hospital only if you have shortness of breath is the most ridiculous thing. Any doctor worth their salt would know that that's the wrong thing to do. So hope that answers your question. Anybody else? Okay, let's see. So I don't see the mic. Who's got the mic? Oh, okay, John. Bring it to Scott. And then this is a good time to end so I can actually have supper.
So a couple of years ago, I was traveling through St. George, and something happened visually with the nuclear bomb. Like, I don't know what it was. I didn't know if the devil was with me, but I had impressions of Enoch. And I doubt any nuclear bomb would hit here. I know there's a lot of cancer around here. But to be honest, I read Amazing Facts as Moving Mountains devotional, and they told me that there is a bunker in Colorado to hide people and like government officials. But there are stars that have bunkers.
Let me comment on that, Scott.
Okay.
There's definitely there's a lot of people that have bunkers, right? We know that. If you have a lot of money, people that have a lot of money, multi-billionaires, they have bunkers. Good for them. They're paying attention. Okay, they know things maybe that many of us don't know. Okay, and so that may not save them. Okay, because in the end, it's probably going to be far worse than they realize. Okay, but the key is that we need to have prudent preparations now, and there's with the tunneling technology that Elon Musk has and others, there's entire cities underground. We know that. It's not common knowledge maybe, but yeah, there's plenty of tunnels full of foods and rations for people that are lucky enough to take advantage, be able to do that. Our goal is that we just need to take care of what our needs are and have the basic needs to survive whatever happens, and then ultimately, going back to your first question, ultimately, we're just going to have to rely on God, because we can't be the final prepper preparer. I mean, I'm a prepper. Being a prepper is just reasonable and common sense in my mind, but I'm not expecting that I'm going to be able to do everything I think I can, because I think eventually we're not going to be able to withstand what's going on. So we're going to rely on God and go from there. Okay. So one last question here or comment. Scott, can you give me the mic? Go ahead, give him the mic. Yeah. Okay, we'll end with this.
There is a map. If you go to Google, there's a map that shows where you are in the United States. Because unlike China and Russia, which have provided places for their people to go in case of nuclear war, we stopped in the 1960s or 70s.
That's correct.
Doing
That's
that.
correct.
That should tell you a lot about America. But and I'm a veteran. I love America. Don't get me wrong. But it's gotten evil. So this shows you every cave, every mining cave, anything that's anywhere near you in case there's a nuclear, a suspected nuclear attack, and you can go there and at least have some cover.
You just got to make sure you're one of the first there.
Yeah, right.
Right. Don't delay. Yeah. Well, like I said, ultimately we're going to have to rely on God to get us through things. But in the meantime, pray for America. Right. Pray for the world, because things are not going well. Things are not going well. Any minute something could go horribly wrong, and we're in the worst possible position politically. Social politically than we've ever been. And so we're going to have to rely on God more than ever, but that also means being reasonable in what we do now to protect and prepare. All right. Thank you, everybody. You got more than you called for tonight, but we had a good session, and we're going to have more sessions like this as early as maybe even next month. I'll come up with a topic. So if you have your emails either with our church or with Youngberg Clinic, dryoungberg.com. Make sure we'll be sending out flyers about the next programs that we're going to do for health. Okay. It's just West Youngberg. Just go to rumble.com.